Sound check 1 2 3. Sound check 1 2 3.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the General Issues Committee budget meeting for January 23rd, 2024. I'd like to call this meeting to order. A reminder that all electronic devices are to switch to a non-audible function. And in chambers this morning, we have joining us Councillor Beattie, Councillor Clark, Councillor Francis, Councillor Kretsch, Councillor Maureen Wilson, Councillor Alex Wilson, Councillor Pauls, Councillor McMeekin, and Mayor Horvath. And joining us online, I see Councillor Jackson. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda this morning?
No, Mr. Chair, there are no changes, but note that the presentation for 6.1 has been revised.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Approval of the agenda. Mover and a seconder, please. Moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Mayor Horvath. All in favor or opposed?
Councillor Mann on the agenda as it presented. In favor. Thank you. Thank you.
And that is unanimous. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? I'm seeing none. So we are moving on then to staff presentations. Item 6.1 is the Housing 2024 budget presentation. Michelle Baird, Director of Housing Services, Justin Lewis, Director of the Housing Secretariat, Steve Robichaud, Director of Planning and Chief Planner, will provide the presentation for item 6.1. Yes.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, through your chair. As the speakers come to the podium, I was just going to provide a little bit of a preamble to the presentation that they'll be providing this morning. Jason Thorne, General Manager of Planning and Economic Development. So as Council knows, there's a few sort of new things being done, new approaches being done this budget season, and this morning's presentation is one of those new things. You're going to be hearing in the next couple of days, as you usually do, from each General Manager on their departmental budgets. Starting this afternoon with Healthy and Safe Communities. But as Council knows, the investments relating to housing and homelessness are a bit unique in that they don't live in just one department or one division. It's a shared responsibility across a number of different areas in the city. So before you hear from each General Manager on the departmental budgets, what we wanted to do this morning was set the stage a little bit by talking about the investments across all the different departments and divisions, specifically as they relate to housing and homelessness. And there's a couple of reasons for this. As Mike mentioned on Friday, the investments in housing and homelessness are a really significant driver and part of the 2024 budget. And of course, we know it's also one of the key council priorities that this council has identified. So this morning's presentation is going to go through a little bit about the housing continuum and the importance of thinking about that housing continuum holistically, and then how some of the 2024 budget investments in different departments and divisions target the different spots in that housing continuum. So you will be hearing from three directors: Michelle Baird, Director of Housing and Healthy and Safe Communities; Justin Lewis, the Director of the Housing Secretariat and Healthy and Safe Communities; and Steve Robichaud, our Chief Planner. There are three of the directors whose budgets directly impact housing and homelessness. They're not the only three, so we have some other areas here of the city represented as well. As I said, they'll do a bit of an overview of the housing continuum, how the city is intervening and investing in each spot, each location within that housing continuum, and talk at the end about some of the 2024 budget investments that relate to that. And as I said, the goal here is to set the stage a little bit so that when the general managers are in front of you with their departmental budgets, they can dive into the details a little bit more. So with that, I will turn things over to the directors.
Thank you, General Manager. Director Baird.
Through the chair, thank you. I'm Michelle Baird, Director of Housing Services Division. There is an echo.
It's fixed. We're good.
So I'm going to start today and talk a little bit about the housing continuum in general, explain the role that the city has in different places along the continuum. The role varies. Some of it is regulatory, some of it is from a funding perspective, and overall what pieces of the city, whether it be us in housing services, the Secretariat, planning, or beyond, who touches the different pieces of the continuum. As an overall place, I would say that we are interested in a healthy continuum across the whole span of what you see here in front of you. It's not that we want one piece to be healthier than another or that we want investment in one place rather than another. When we think of a continuum, we're thinking of places that each piece of this plays a role in ensuring that people have housing options that meet their need in the city. I would also point out that it's not necessarily, although you see a linear continuum here in front of you, it's not necessarily that people move from one place along the continuum to the next. In fact, it can move in different places in the continuum, and some people might be shifting toward the right, and then for all sorts of life reasons, come back on the left on the continuum once again. So we are going to talk about that. The other piece that I'm going to start with is the idea of affordability versus affordable housing. And we'll go a bit deeper into that as we get in further into the presentation. When we talk about housing affordability, because that is a phrase we hear from time to time, really on each piece of this continuum and for the whole of the community in Hamilton, affordability, there are affordability issues for everyone in each place on this continuum. Affordability really just looks at your income, your expenses on an individual household basis and what you can afford. When we talk about affordable housing, on the other hand, we are talking about a defined type of housing that meets the needs of individuals, for the most part, in the low to mid-income brackets. And you're going to hear more from Director Lewis as well as from Chief Planner Robichaud as we go forward in this presentation. When I talk about the city having different roles within different aspects of this continuum that you see in front of you, the other piece to mention is that not every city has the same roles, not every municipality has the same roles with respect to different pieces on the continuum, and in many cases it is Hamilton defined, the pieces that we play a role in or the pieces we invest in or not. In some cases, they are provincially legislated for us, what our role is in some of these housing sectors, but not in all. And so we wanted to share that today so you could see that this is the overall continuum, and our role is in many cases defined here in Hamilton. We take a whole of Hamilton approach when we think about housing. That's the reason that the three of us are here presenting to you today, but in fact it's even broader than our three divisions, and in fact many pieces in Hamilton, many of our divisions, many of our areas, as well as lots of other players in the community have a role in housing. In 2023, as you know, Hamilton City Council declared an emergency with respect to homelessness and the homelessness crisis in the city. When we think about homelessness, it's not a straightforward issue. It's a complex issue, and it's not just about lack of housing or not even lack of affordable housing. There are a number of factors that play in here, some systemic factors, some factors at an individual level. When we think about the homelessness crisis and think about setting where we are today, and you'll see later some of the investments and think about how they play into it. When we think about homelessness, for example, lack of affordable housing is certainly one piece that's feeding into that issue. The other piece when we think about homelessness is income supports social assistance rates. So in Hamilton, for example, for individuals who are on OW, they're on ODSP, the shelter component of those income supports that they're receiving in many cases make up about a quarter of the cost of an average rent in the city of Hamilton. So you can imagine for some of our most vulnerable residents who find themselves relying on social assistance, paying for rental rates even at that average rate is simply not achievable. We also have issues with respect to mental health and addictions in the city, and that is certainly one of the factors that's playing into the housing crisis and the homelessness crisis overall. When we think about simply providing someone with housing, housing alone, be it affordable or otherwise, is not necessarily a sustainable solution for everyone in our community. And if we truly want to address the homelessness crisis, we need to think about all those factors. And then finally, of course, the issue of affordability and the lack of housing overall. When we go back and look at that continuum that we talked about early on, if we don't have places for people to move along the continuum, individuals, and we've talked about this before, they kind of get stuck where they are, even if they have the means to afford perhaps further along the continuum, market housing, what have you. But if those options aren't available for people, we end up in that place. So supply and demand is certainly one of the factors at play, but it's not the only one. So it's not housing alone that we want to see investments in. All right. On this particular slide, we're bringing your attention to, there are 3 main areas within the city and our city divisions that support housing. However, we have a number of services, and I'll talk about those 3 areas, but also bring your attention to the fact that these divisions are supported by a number of other services within the city, be that legal, for example, corporate finance, and we can't lose sight of the role that they play as well. In addition, although we're here today and talking to you about the city's roles in housing overall, there are other city divisions, be that public works, public health, for example, bylaw, that are instrumental in supporting the needs of people in housing as well. So on this particular slide, we're going to start with Housing Services Division. Housing Services Division within Healthy and Safe Community really is the social service provider, if you will, around the housing continuum. It's the safety net for many people and provides the services people need to support their housing needs. On the other hand, when we move along here and we see the Housing Secretariat Division, the Housing Secretariat Division, newly established, is giving us the opportunity to really focus on building new housing and facilitating the development of new affordable housing within the city. They are creating and maintaining affordable housing and hopefully expanding that supply we have while also maintaining the supply in place. And then the next section that you're seeing here is development approvals and development planning. So when we think of that section of work, what they're doing truly is assisting residents, businesses, to see that they have the instruments in place, the tools in place to develop new housing, new employment opportunities, new businesses within the city. And so you'll see that there is, as we go forward, you're going to see a lot of overlap in how we support certain sectors of the continuum, but the rules are distinctly different. I have City Housing Hamilton here on this slide before you because City Housing Hamilton is wholly owned with the city as the shareholder. However, City Housing Hamilton is a housing provider, and although they have about 50% of our overall social housing units, they are one of our providers. You can think of many others, Kiwanis, Indwell, for example, just to point out a few, Victoria Park, and all of these providers are no different than City Housing Hamilton. And we're just flagging this here because I think at times people question, where is the City Housing Hamilton, where are they within that role? And really for us, they are a provider like those other providers. Okay, and here you see in front of you a bit of a depiction of who does what and where our roles are. And so on this particular slide, again, you're seeing those 3 divisions that we spoke about earlier, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of what this means and what this slide means, because, again, there's a lot of overlaps on the sectors we're supporting, although the roles are different. So we start at the left-hand side of the continuum here in the homelessness sector. Housing Services Division is the lead division in that particular part of the continuum. We are supporting this sector with funding, standards, policy, that kind of thing. And then we move, that is truly folks who are truly homeless. Those are individuals who are unhoused and living in encampments, for example, in our city. Then we move up to an emergency shelter situation. Again, housing being the overall lead within that particular part of the continuum. And then we kind of get into transitional living, where you're going to see that there are some supports coming from Housing Secretariat if we were in a place that we were able to build some new transitional living housing. And then we come into supportive housing. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in depth about supportive housing going forward. But suffice it to say again, at this point in the continuum is really in a place where we start to see permanent housing options come into place. These are folks who have leased spaces, and so we're coming into more permanent housing solutions from this point up in the continuum. Community housing, that is a term that is being widely embraced by the province and beyond. This captures what we might have called social housing previously, as well as those social housing providers that come to end of agreement, end of mortgage, and so that's where the community housing, that part of the continuum, captures that particular piece of housing. As we move further right into affordable housing, you'll see that the role of housing services really falls off here. This is not really where our role is. Housing Secretariat is the lead with respect to building new affordable housing and bringing housing online. For housing services, and we'll go a bit deeper into this, for us, we are in a service provision role here. So if we have individuals, for example, who are in affordable housing, we can support them with maintaining rents, that kind of things, but we are not the lead on the affordable housing front. Then we come into market housing. This is exactly as the name says, and really this is the home ownership or the market rentals within our community. Housing Services does not have a role here, while you'll see that planning in fact does carry into this spectrum. And then, as I mentioned, really underpinning all of the work we do and supporting all of us are the support services across the city that also touches the work along the housing continuum. I think Justin is going to speak to this one.
Thanks, Michelle. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, Council and Madam Mayor. This morning, we also wanted to talk a little bit in our presentation around policies and plans and frameworks that guide our work or help us to do the work that we do with the city's involvement across the continuum. We've also had several guiding policy documents regarding homelessness. So these reports are mandated as conditions of provincial and federal funding for us in some instances. Hamilton is committed to building a proactive community-wide approach oriented around ending rather than managing homelessness. Approved by Council in 2013 and updated in 2020, the City of Hamilton's Housing and Homelessness Action Plan demonstrates Hamilton's commitment to ending homelessness. The plan will be going through a provincially directed renewal process in 2024. The current action plan has 5 key pillars, as you know: supply, quality, supports, choice, and equity. This plan and the SMART targets that are included represent the strategic focus on the housing system, but much has changed since 2019 when the plan was developed, and the renewal in 2024 will create an adapted plan that focuses on the strategic direction of the Housing Services Division and the impact on the division's work. The targets within this plan have also been incorporated in the Housing Sustainability and Investment Roadmap to align efforts in achieving council priorities. In 2019, the City of Hamilton launched the Coming Together to End Homelessness Systems Planning Framework to outline Hamilton's homelessness ending strategy. Hamilton's strategy to end homelessness is also laid out in the Reaching Home Homelessness Plan from 2019 to 2024. These foundational documents continue to guide collective action and investments in an integrated system. In April of 2023, Council declared homelessness as a crisis and approved the Housing Sustainability and Investment Roadmap as a tactical strategy, accelerated progress on the production and protection of affordable and supportive housing through 4 pillars, as you know: new construction, acquisition of at-risk units, preservation of existing units, and providing housing with supports. The strategies outlined in the roadmap prioritize forming partnerships with community stakeholders and fostering internal collaboration with the city divisions. In June of 2018, Planning Committee directed staff to review existing criteria for conversions of primary rental housing form, rental tenure to condominium within the city's official plan. The Planning and Economic Development Department are looking to develop policies related to preventing negative impacts on Hamilton's existing rental stock as a result of conversions to condominium tenure or demolition of buildings containing 6 or more rental units. This framework will be a part of revised official plan policies and a proposed bylaw under the Municipal Act. It's important to also note that numerous activities and decisions related to housing, both affordable and less affordable, as well as addressing homelessness, are regulated by legislation such as Housing Services Act, the Planning Act, and the Building Code. Through federal funding obtained through the Housing Accelerator Fund, we have secured financial support to conduct a housing needs assessment for the City of Hamilton in 2024. This has the potential to bring all priorities together. I will pass the presentation back to my colleague, Director Barrett. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, we're going to go a little bit deeper into each segment of the continuum, talk about what the investments are we have in that particular segment of the continuum, what the interventions are that the city has a role in, and overall what our city role is. At this end of the spectrum, we're looking at the very, very far left, and we're looking at homelessness. These are individuals who truly are unhoused within our community. Some of those individuals live in encampments. Some of them are perhaps in and out of shelters. Some might live with friends. And so these folks truly are unhoused and some of the most vulnerable individuals within our city. The impacts on these individuals and their ability to secure housing and sustain that housing is there are a number of barriers in place. And so for this particular segment of the continuum, we are in the emergency response part of housing. As I said, housing, the homelessness crisis is a complex issue. It's an interplay of a number of issues that are happening within our city, and that's where we find ourselves with people who are experiencing homelessness. On this particular part of the continuum, we have a number of key interventions. Our emergency shelters, for example, provide opportunities for people, as it says, to find shelter and when they're in that place of crisis. We have outreach workers, and when we talk about outreach workers, they're not solely within housing services. Many agencies within our community provide outreach services of different types. Within public health, for example, there are outreach workers as well, and these individuals attempt to meet people where they are, connect them with services, perhaps provide them with some harm reduction services, what have you. It's a broad scope of work in this particular intervention. We have some intensive case management that's happening, some of which is funded through those funding envelopes that we get either provincially or federally within the city. There's also, again, intensive case management that's happening outside of the city of Hamilton with other providers. And then finally, on this end of the housing continuum, we also see rapid rehousing and diversion programs. So these programs, through housing services as well as through some of our shelter providers, in fact, support people who are at risk of immediately becoming homeless and experiencing homelessness, and find alternatives, sometimes financial, sometimes supports with reconnection with their own community, their own family, to really prevent people from becoming homeless in that moment. We know that it is, once people experience homelessness, that's certainly more expensive than finding diversion opportunities for individuals. And once people find themselves within that shelter system, it's more difficult to bring them back into the continuum. So all of those particular interventions truly are at the unhoused and homelessness end of the spectrum. In Hamilton, as of the end of December, we have 1,633 individuals who are actively homeless. And of those, 583 are identified as chronically homeless. When we talk about those individuals that are chronically homeless, this is the group of individuals that I spoke about earlier who really, we do need some supportive housing in place to meet their needs in order to maintain and actually obtain and sustain their housing needs. Right now in Hamilton, we have 618 shelter beds, and I know that number is increased, perhaps from the last time that I spoke to you. This includes, we are continuing to use our hotel overflow beds, in addition to the beds that we brought online as part of winter response. However, even with this number of shelter beds, you can see that there's still not everybody that's experiencing homelessness right now has a shelter option provided for them. The other, okay, here we go. On the next stage, we're coming into a place of transitional housing. Transitional housing is not permanent housing, but rather a bridge. It's a bridge from a place of the emergency system to give people a bit of a step up, the resources that they need in order to continue on, find permanent housing, and move along the housing continuum. These are individuals, for the most part, who do not need a lot of supports, but rather are in an acute situation, in a time-limited situation, and so transitional living covers that bridge, if you will. Transitional, oh, here we go. Sorry, I'm still back here. So transitional living in Hamilton, this is probably the smallest part of our housing continuum that the city funds and supports. Transitional living, there are overlaps with the emergency shelter system. So some of our providers that are in this space might also provide emergency shelters. They might also provide shelter for women who are experiencing and fleeing violence. So the city funds women's transitional living beds at the YWCA, as well as some youth beds through Wesley Urban Ministries. Evidence suggests that those particular groups can benefit from the use of transitional living, and so those are our funded beds. There are other transitional living programs in the city, there are other transitional beds in the city, however, those are the only two that the city has a funding role in. All right, as we move along the continuum, we're now in a place of supportive housing. Supportive housing, for the most part, these are leased housing options. So these are permanent housing options for folks who need some support with activities of daily living, perhaps, to be able to maintain their housing and to live a successful life. I think that we've talked lots about supportive housing here, primarily from the place of homelessness and how do we end chronic homelessness in the city. We want to bring your attention to the fact that, in fact, that's a small segment of what is out there with respect to supportive housing. Supportive housing really covers everything from long-term care to retirement homes, our residential care facilities. There are a number of types of supportive housing that the province both funds and regulates. If you think about provincial homes for people with special needs, for example, corrections also provides and funds some supportive housing. For the purpose of us in the city, the type of supportive housing that we're talking about truly is that housing to support individuals to see them exit homelessness. However, the city, of course, has 2 long-term care homes, and so we are a provider of supportive housing in different ways as well. So this part of the continuum, as we went through, truly can include things like residential care facilities as well as some supportive housings beyond this. The other piece for this, sorry, I have my notes in paper instead of the screen, so I'm kind of bouncing back and forth here. So in these particular interventions that you see on the screen here, residential care facilities, for example, the city licenses and regulates residential care facilities within the city. For a portion of our residential care facilities, we subsidize the housing for the individuals who live there. And these are permanent housing opportunities. When we think about other existing supportive housing, we might think about things like Dorothy Day, which is a housing solution that the city supported and really sees that's the type of solution we would want for individuals who are experiencing homelessness. If we think about Dorothy Day, for example, Dorothy Day came online this year in last year, I guess, in 2023, and 73 women are living at Dorothy Day now. Some of the individuals who are most challenging to secure housing and house over the past number of years. Many of the individuals at Dorothy Day came directly from being unsheltered in encampments or from the shelter system. Since they moved into Dorothy Day, for the most part, they have had great outcomes with respect to the women that moved in there, for the most part, are the women that stay there and are still there and are seeing successful housing. When we think about harm reduction, for example, since Dorothy Day opened, they haven't had an overdose on site among these women since they moved into the home. So when we think about how do we support people that exit homelessness, supportive housing of that type can be extremely effective in meeting the needs of individuals in our community. There does, though, continue to be a need for more supportive housing like that in the city. And as this group certainly knows, we've been advocating to our colleagues at the province and federal government to support us financially and seeing that those support services are able to be provided. When we talk about supportive housing and what people need, they need supports on site or able to come on site to meet their needs. It's not that they are provided with affordable housing and need to go elsewhere to have their needs met, but rather the supports are on site. And back quickly to residential care facilities, because this is a place where we really truly have a role with respect to oversight and funding. So in Hamilton, we have approximately 1,100 residential care facility beds. That's the total number of beds. And then we have approximately 800 of those are subsidized. So Housing Services flows that funding. However, these are all licensed homes, so bylaw has a role here as well as public health. Community housing. So this is the one I briefly touched on earlier. This is what we would have called previously social housing. And as those social housing providers come to their end of mortgage, end of agreement, they are part of what now the province would use the community housing name to basically capture that whole bucket of housing. In Hamilton, community housing is our largest sector of social safety net for those individuals that need supports with housing. These are administered not-for-profit groups that are providing this particular housing. They are affordable, but they're also being provided by a not-for-profit provider. They are in many cases municipally owned, and that's City Housing Hamilton, for example. They are an example of community housing, but they're not the only one. And overall, these are not supportive housing. There are examples where supportive housing is being provided within this context, but they truly are an affordable housing option for folks. So on this particular part of the housing continuum, the interventions we have in place are the end of mortgage, end of operating agreement, as you know, and we're going to talk more about the investment in this particular strategy going forward. End of mortgage, end of operating agreement for both our federal and provincial housing projects. They are coming to the end of their mortgage agreements, and so we need to provide that support to see that we keep these particular homes online. We have capital repair programs. The infrastructure in this particular bucket is aging, and so we do have programs to make sure that we're able to maintain the stock we have. The other piece of this particular piece is that we provide housing benefits, housing allowances to make sure that people can have affordable housing available to them. And we're always, of course, expanding the existing supply. So on the social housing or community housing perspective right now, we have approximately 14,000 units in Hamilton. So these are rent geared to income units, some of them, and so you'll see that of the RGI units, we have 7,600 approximately. This is below the service standard that the province sets for us. However, we are above service standard with respect to meeting the needs of individuals, households who might need modified units, for example. The last data we have, we get our annual data for this particular wait list, that we still have over 6,000 individuals on the wait list. So you can really see an indicator of need there. These 6,000 individuals are not all homeless. However, they are either underhoused, perhaps overhoused, or their current housing doesn't meet their housing needs. When I talk about us being below the service standard, what happens with these particular units and in the context of the continuum as a whole is there are individuals, this is a good example of where people, when I spoke previously about people getting stuck, there are individuals perhaps who at one time were eligible for rent geared to income units. They are now in a different place and able to, they're no longer eligible for RGI units. However, we don't have stock available further on in the continuum that is available to them, and as a result, they end up being in these RGI units. So the number of units we have tends to decrease. They are paying their market affordable rate, not being subsidized, but we lose the unit through that process. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Director Lewis.
Thanks, Director Baird. I'd like to, on this slide, direct the presentation towards exploring strategies to advance affordable housing within our community. So this slide references the provincial official definition of affordable housing, which is based on 2 criteria. First, the rent amount should not exceed 30% of households' gross income. And secondly, the definition targets households whose income are in the lower 60th percentile. In Hamilton, this equals approximately monthly rents of $1,800 and below. As a reminder, affordable housing stretches from rent geared to income all the way to 125% of CMHC average market rents. Rental rates for those in receipt of RGI assistance within community housing are typically set according to the household's income, and households paying no more than 30% of their income towards their rent. Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support Program households RGI is calculated using a rent scale, which is outlined in the Housing Services Act. The policy and plans that are in relation to all of this are the Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, the Housing Sustainability and Investment Roadmap, but also the official plan and GRID's growth strategy. Housing is also related to transit planning, and it's related to thriving and safe communities. I'd like to also just point out on this slide that the municipality is very limited in what tools it has. The province has the most policy levers to address housing affordability. The most impactful contributors to policy differences would be vacancy control, social assistance rates, rent control, eviction prevention. Council will recall the detailed update provided in November regarding all activities undertaken by divisions across the city and community relative to the Housing Sustainability and Investment Roadmap and its 4 pillars. We continue to move forward with a whole of Hamilton approach, which involves departments and divisions across the city. Next slide, please, Michelle. As I stated on the provision slides and focusing a little bit on key interventions, the Housing Sustainability and Investment Roadmap outlines 4 pillars or focus areas. Those pillars are new construction, acquisition of at-risk private affordable rental housing, preservation of existing housing, and increasing housing with supports. Through the creation of the HSIR, it was founded that we lose 23 affordable housing units for every new unit we build. Building new is not enough. The latest initiative to expedite construction of nonprofit affordable housing in Hamilton is the Affordable Housing Development Project Stream. The Housing Secretariat is set to collaborate with not-for-profit housing providers in identifying and qualifying projects to expedite construction once funding becomes accessible. Funding allocations approved through the project stream will support nonprofits with creating at least 200 supportive and affordable housing units, and will be a major upgrade to the city's current efforts to leverage funding from other orders of government. The funding for the initiative will be allocated through the following programs that we mentioned on the screen: the Affordable Housing Funding Reserve Program, the new Potential Affordable Housing or Supportive Housing Infrastructure Funding Program, the Affordable Housing Property Disposition Fund, and the Housing Accelerator Fund, which will potentially have a surplus for future affordable housing builds. The Housing Secretariat's new webpage will not only offer the online application process for Affordable Housing Development Project Stream, but it will also offer an opportunity for developers, industry experts to indicate their interest in contributing to solutions, as well as reaching out to community members and tenants with lived experience to advise the Housing Secretariat on the work as it begins. Council has made significant progress in advancing the key elements of the roadmap in the past year. The annual report delivered to Council in November summarized these achievements and outlined the goals for the upcoming year. One of the particular areas of progress has been establishing and revising bylaws to protect our current stock of affordable housing while facilitating new builds. And I'll now hand over the presentation over to my colleague and Chief Planner, Robichaud, to bring us through that information. Over to you.
Thank you. Steve Robichaud, Chief Planner. Sorry. I'm going to speak about market housing, which is a primary role of the Planning and Economic Development Department. And market housing is defined as housing within the community that has a rent or payment at or near the average market. Market housing. And market housing is generally housing provided by the market in both ownership and rental housing. In terms of the housing market, the City of Hamilton is forecasted to grow by 110,000 households in the 2021 to 2051 time period. And in 2023, City of Hamilton was one of the few municipalities that actually met the provincial housing target based on the Building Faster Fund. We were 97% of the target, which is a very significant accomplishment. To implement Council's direction for a no urban boundary growth management strategy that will result in a continued shift towards more dense forms of housing and a focus on housing supply. It's important to note that the vacant land supply within the City of Hamilton over the last 20 years has decreased by 70%. That's the land supply. So it's dropped from 3,900 hectares to 1,200 hectares. Conversely, though, within that exact same time period, the unit supply within the City of Hamilton has increased by 36%, or 10,000 units in that time period, as well as the city has grown by approximately 30,000 households based on building permit activity. So although our land supply is decreasing, which is putting pressure on land prices, our unit supply is increasing at the same time we are producing units. So that is a significant accomplishment. So what it means is the city has added approximately 60,000 households over the last 20 years when you look at both unit supply and unit production. And last year, Planning Committee approved over 5,000 units just through Planning Committee alone, and there was a significant number of units were approved at the site plan process. So the city has continued to the development approvals to increase the supply of housing and looking at meeting that full continuum of housing needs. And one of the important things is it's also reflecting in our intensification targets. We've been trending higher and higher intensification targets, and we will be reporting soon that with the firm urban boundary, the province differentiating the city into two areas, a designated greenfield and a built boundary, we are seeing significant amount of growth within what is traditionally considered the established urban areas and the built boundary. As Justin indicated, affordable housing is based on a provincial definition where households shouldn't spend no more than 30% of their gross household income on their ownership costs or their rental costs, which translates into about $1,800 a month for a two-bedroom unit or $505,000 for an ownership unit. We are seeing, in terms of the ownership market, the average single price was $820,000 last year, $700,000 for a townhouse, and $500,000 for an apartment dwelling. So the higher density, more dense form of housing in the owner are meeting that affordable definition based on the province. But on the rental side, we are losing ground. The average rent was approximately $2,300 a month report, whereas the provincial definition is $1,800 a month. So there's a $500 delta there between average rent and what the provincial definition of rent. And what's important in that, as you may recall, the Who Will Swing the Hammer report that the home builders and Mike Moffat presented was that the affordability issue will become a drag or has the potential to be a drag on growth within the economy. And it's also important to ensure that the report noted that we need to provide for that full continuum of housing needs, especially the larger units, the 1-bedroom plus den, 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom units to accommodate that full continuum of housing needs, especially for multi-generational needs, as well as to look at the opportunities for creating more seniors-related housing. In terms of what we have been doing, we've been doing a lot of work, both planning, growth management, all the various groups within PED, MLE, recently in terms of both protecting our existing housing stock and growing the housing stock. So in terms of protections, the most recent discussion and council decision or committee decision around rent evictions, rental housing licensing, the ongoing pilot project. We will be coming forward in March with a rental housing replacement report, looking to put in a framework where demolitions are occurring related to new construction, and what would that look like, as well as a review of the condominium conversion policies and framework, really ensuring that we're keeping what we have, at the same time we're looking at increasing the supply. We're looking at also planning for that full continuum of housing needs. This includes requirements for housing replacement plans. We have done that on one-off. Council's approved that, but we will be moving to a more formalized framework. The mixture of housing units through the policies adopted in OPA 167, it does allow for an increase in height and density on that condition for medium density development from 8 to 12 stories, where there's a mixture of housing units as opposed to just providing those smaller investor units that don't meet that full continuum of housing needs. And we're investigating an inclusionary zoning framework within the station areas and coming forward and reporting on that. And a very important issue relates to the pre-zoning that we've been involved in, updating the zoning bylaws. There were approximately 40 different residential zones in the amalgamated city of Hamilton. That has been consolidated down to 2 zones for low-density residential, and we will be continuing bringing forward end of February with an update to complete the low-density residential zoning projects that'll harmonize the zoning as well as provide on a citywide basis across all of the former urban communities the permissions for single semis, row housing as of right, plus the conversions up to 4 units as well as secondary dwelling units. That covers 85,000 properties. If each of those properties was to add 1 unit, that would be an additional 85,000 units. If they were to go to the 4 units, you'd have almost 320,000 units being created, where today we have 80,000 units. So that will be the enabling framework to allow for that additional housing to be built. And then finally, I would like to say that, it is 80,000 properties have now been pre-zoned to allow for accessory dwelling units, and that we've been working with our colleagues in Housing Services and the Housing Secretariat on advancing the ADU and creating the accessory dwelling unit framework in terms of helping property owners develop accessory dwelling units. And we anticipate we have the stretch goal to almost double that production from about 320 units in 2022 to 520 units going forward, moving towards 700 units a year, which will be a significant component of our housing supply. Thank you.
Okay, so this particular slide, we're kind of getting into the financial part of this presentation now. Just want to start by saying that we're fairly high level in this particular presentation. We're going to talk you through this sort of overall picture with respect to housing investments. We'll go through very briefly the overall council referred items that support the housing initiatives, but the details will come through the departmental presentations to follow. So on this particular slide, you're seeing that the investments in housing include provincial and federal investments. The blue here is where we see our municipal investment. The municipal reserves come into the picture here in 2024. The gray bars are our provincial investments that we're seeing, and then finally we see the federal contributions in the yellow. These are the total net housing investments from 2023 to 2027 on this particular slide. These figures represent the total municipal net contributions as opposed to the gross contributions that I think GM Zegeric provided you with on Friday. Between 2024 and 2023, we're seeing a net increase of $23.2 million versus in 2024, $169.8 million, and that's the net once again. The increase in municipal and reserve investments of $43 million in 2024 when compared to 2023 are driven by housing legislated and contractual increases, for example, the council referred items that we're going to walk through in a moment, the Housing Services Division and Housing Secretariat Division operating costs and council referred items, as well as the impact that housing has from those investments through planning and economic development and some investments from public works as well. You'll see an increase here in provincial funding of $2.2 million. That's because we do have an increase in our COCHE funding confirmed for the 24-25 year. That particular funding envelope is tied to social service providers. When we talked previously about the end of mortgage or end of agreement, as more of our providers come to end of agreement, this funding is provided to the municipality to ensure that we're able to maintain and sustain those units that we have after the agreement is finished. We also have a decrease in federal funding, though, of $22 million. That's related to $11 million that was what we had in 2023 from the Rapid Housing Initiative that we don't have confirmation for 24 or beyond, as well as previously we'd not had confirmation that we were receiving Reaching Home money from the federal government. However, that we do know that we are getting that funding for 24 and beyond. However, we're seeing a reduction in amounts. In 2025, on the graph here, you're seeing that the municipal and reserve investments increased by $11 million, and that continues with the council referred items. You're also seeing here, though, that the provincial investments continue to decrease. And then in 2026, again, we're seeing a decrease of $27.4 million, and the total municipal and reserve investments increase once again. So I think on this slide overall, we just want to show, and I know that James Zegaric went through this as well, what's happening over time is you're seeing that the municipal investment in housing is continuing to increase, and at the same time that we're seeing those investments from other orders of government decrease over time. And so with housing, being a priority for this council, but also being an issue that is at the provincial and federal funding place, we are seeing that, in fact, it's the municipality that's continuing to step up to support the housing needs of Hamiltonians. I'd also point out on this particular slide, in addition to this particular funding that we see in front of us, the Housing Accelerator funding that is federal funding is not shown on this particular graph. However, that is federal funding that will support housing initiatives within the city. It's just not reflected in this particular figure. So here's where we walk through exactly what the municipal investments for 2024 look like and where the reserves come into play, what's paid for from the reserve versus what's covered through the levy. So the municipal levy in 2024, we're seeing $22 million. $17.3 million of that is in the council referred investments. We're going to go through that list in a moment. We also have that $4 million that supports our legislated contractual obligations. Part of that, for example, when we look at the community housing providers, the province sets the benchmark at which we need to compensate those providers for the services, the costs, hydro, whatnot. And so those benchmarks are set provincially. We also have levy money here to support the Housing Secretariat. In reserves, again, we'll go through the CRIs and the council referred items in detail and look at which ones are coming from reserves versus levy. We see that, again, $22.5 million is in council referred items that will be funded through the reserve. When we go through the items that are being funded from the reserve versus what's coming from the levy, those items coming from the reserve are items that we're quite hopeful that over the 4-year period we might find other solutions and they might not be needed and hopefully won't be needed on a long-term and sustainable basis. There are funds here and coming from the reserves to support the housing opioid plan. Now, this one was actually referred back to April, so although it's not yet in the council referred list, previously it was in this list of items, and this would be the funding source for that particular strategy. And then we have 2023 one-time COVID-19, so we have some savings here, 1.9 million, because parts of that reserve have been removed. All right, the council referred items. So any item here that has an asterisk in the column, these are items that are being funded through reserve. All right, so the first particular item here, the CHH redevelopment, I guess I would step back to and start with, these are all the council referred items that support the housing initiatives that are aligned to the 4 pillars of the housing roadmap. They're also aligned to council priorities. They are not sorted here necessarily by division. It does indicate what division is responsible. However, there's work that crosses the multiple divisions within this particular list of investments. The CHH redevelopment is for the work that's happening at Bay and Cannon. This is one that's been delayed for some time. However, confident that that is moving forward in 2024. The next particular item here that you are seeing is the $3.6 million. Those are the operating dollars for Dorothea Day that I spoke to previously. This is an instance where the municipality has picked up the operating costs for supportive housing because we didn't have investment from other orders of government. So that's what that particular referred item is. Winter response, we're seeing that daily right now. So that's an ongoing pressure that we'll have, and that's to ensure that we have a sustainable winter response on an ongoing basis. The next item here is the tenant support program. This is clearly tied into the work that that bylaw brought forward around the renovictions work overall. This is the program that will actually support tenants in accessing legal aid should they need that, accessing resources, understanding what their rights are as tenants. So this is the housing services component of that protecting tenants and maintaining units. Then we have the addressing the needs of unsheltered, and you'll see that that crosses both housing services and housing secretariat. Housing, this particular item within that report when it came forward to council had a request to have funding approved for supportive housing. When the report came forward, it was just prior or at the very outset of establishing the Secretariat, so it happens to be in that particular holistic report. Housing Secretariat is the lead with respect to bringing that supportive housing online, while the other pieces in this referred item speak to the shelter system and what have you, and that's where Housing Services has a role. Then, of course, the family shelter system that is looking to expand services within that system that continues to be under pressure. Both the family shelter system as well as the end of mortgage that we're coming up against next, you'll see that there are gross amounts, but not net amounts. These are examples of items that are being paid for from reserve. We are hopeful that over the coming 4 years, of course, that we're in a place that the family shelter system, hopefully the need is better managed with permanent housing solutions rather than continuing investment in the emergency response. The end of mortgage strategy and implementation, at the end of this period, we won't be out of that period of needing end of mortgage. However, if we focus on funding it from the reserve for the next few years, it allows us to understand what the true need is there and what the program needs to look like to support these providers going forward. Then we have an operating subsidy. This is for a property that were not yet operational, but they need an operating subsidy at Caroline in order to make those rents affordable. And so, again, seeing that that is an ongoing pressure, and it's one that will continue, so this investment would be funded through the levy. And then we come into the housing stability benefits and Rent Ready. These are the programs, again, offered through Housing Services. These are supports for individuals who are at risk of losing their housing for financial reasons, and supports them to maintain their housing, maintain their rent. And so this is a program that we're looking at expanding going forward. The need right now certainly outstrips demand. Then we come into both the Renoviction License Bylaw as well as the Safe Apartments Bylaw. These are coming through bylaw, of course, and I think we've talked lots about them recently. Finally, the Encampment Protocol implementation. The costs here, although it says Housing Services is the lead, and we are the lead and coordinator, costs in this particular item include items that cover services within housing, services within bylaw, our colleagues in parks through Public Works as well. And then finally, there are some resources here that are supporting the organizational review implementation within Housing Services. And we can talk a little bit about these as needed, but for the most part, these will be discussed through their respective departmental budgets, some of which you'll see later this morning. On that note, I'm turning it over to GM Thorne.
So through the chair, hopefully that is a helpful sort of overview of the different housing and homelessness related investments that you'll see in some of the departmental presentations. As Michelle noted, the first one coming up as your next agenda item. And then there's a number in there as well that we've spoken about through the Planning and Economic Development Department presentation. So happy to take any questions on this presentation now, but also through those departmental presentations as we dig a bit more into the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Baird, Chief Planner Robichaud, Director Lewis. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. So just as a reminder, as General Manager Thorne just stated, that there will be more details in the individual departmental presentations. So today, really high level, focused on the presentation that we heard. So with that, I'll go to Mayor Horvath to start the discussion. Mayor?
Thanks very much, Chair Danko. I just have really one question. I'm quite familiar with all of the housing pieces, but I'm wondering if you can explain or kind of talk about something that comes up often from community and others, and that is this idea that perhaps an abandoned school, or perhaps an abandoned mall, or perhaps some big facility, perhaps the armories, for example, should and can effectively be used as emergency shelter space. And so I guess what I'm asking for is, what are the barriers to those solutions, and are there ways to take those barriers away?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the mayor, I guess there'd be two. One would be, there's planning permissions, building code, et cetera, what is required to allow for that versus funding and or permission from the landowner. On the development approval zoning side, if it's a city-run facility or it's being partnered or service being delivered on behalf of the city, the zoning bylaw would facilitate or allow for that use. If the city has a role or a partnership in it, we don't have to own it. So if we were just to go and lease a mall per se, and then through housing services or the secretariat partner with another group to deliver that shelter, whether it's for 48 hours or for a longer time period, the zoning would not be an issue. There may be building code requirements dealing with basic health and safety to protect the residents or the tenants in that duration that would have to be investigated. And then it might be in terms of capacity and funding, I would assume, to deliver that service and oversee the operation. But we have been looking at removing any of those regulatory barriers to allow for it to happen, especially when the city is partnering either directly or indirectly in the delivery of those that emergency shelter or housing option.
Through the chair. So this is a very timely question, and it's one that comes to us a lot frequently, particularly now that we're in the winter months. And I think our whole community doesn't want to see our neighbors unhoused. And so people are bringing forward suggestions on what we can do. And in follow-up to Director Robichaud's point, the other piece for us is that the city as a whole, we don't necessarily operate these kinds of facilities. It's not just that we need an empty building. An empty building is certainly a starting point. The regulatory pieces are there, but the other part is it needs to be a building that meets the needs of the individuals that are seeking shelter. We also need to find an agency to actually operate and run these facilities. The individuals that we're seeing unhoused, there's complex needs that need to be met. And so as well, as good as a vacant building might be, it's more than a vacant building that we need to put in place to provide adequate shelter to individuals.
And if I can, just as a follow-up on that point, Director Baird, through the chair, if we were to find a partner that would be willing to provide the services, where does the funding come for those services? Where does that come from?
Through the chair. So for emergency services for individuals experiencing homelessness, that is partially covered through the provincial budget, the homelessness prevention budget. Unfortunately, that budget is beyond capacity right now, and in fact, the municipality is picking up the overflow costs associated with providing homelessness services. So if such a building was able to be identified and we were successful in finding an operator to operate the services, the funding would be municipal funding at this point in time to cover those kinds of services.
And I'll just one final question through you, Chair Danko. Do you have a sense of order of magnitude of what kind of cost that would be in terms of, let's say, housing in a scenario like this? All of the folks who are currently unhoused, as per the slide that you showed a little bit earlier in your presentation. So it'd be like 1,600 people.
Through the chair, it's a very good question. I don't have a great answer for you, unfortunately. What I can, I guess, equate it to is if I look at our emergency hotel overflow right now, where we are housing families, it's costing approximately $6 million a year to cover those costs, and that's for families only.
Can I just follow up with the, how many people is that?
So the hotel overflow right now, there's approximately 50 families. There's more than 50 rooms based on the size of the family. Basically, some need 2 rooms or more to accommodate their needs. So that covers approximately 50 families.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mayor. So moving on to our speakers list, I have Councillor Alex Wilson, followed by Councillor Jackson and Councillor Nan. Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, going to do my best to respect your high-level commentary at the beginning. And I think as high-level as this is, I look at the kind of slide 2022, which is the 2023 to 2027 net housing total investment, all 3 levels of government, the bar chart there. And I think I heard this as commentary, and I'm just seeking confirmation, is part of our political strategy with this, our government relations strategy, our advocacy strategy has been to put it up and to say, no, we'll fund this from reserves. We don't want to fund this from reserves. We're not seeking to fund it. This is not our hope, is in 2025 to spend 17% of the budget from reserves. The hope is to show higher levels of government that we're serious about this, we're committed about this, and then those would be funding buckets. So when there's money's looking, oftentimes my understanding is higher levels of government are looking to fund a real project that's all figured out. They're not looking to give kind of $2 million, $3 million to figure out a plan. They want a plan already there. And so is this enabling us, hopefully, or part of the thinking behind this? Obviously, we don't control the writing of checks, but as part of this thinking is to aid us in seeking and making competitive applications for provincial and federal funding.
So through the chair, I'd say short answer is yes. I hope this information is helpful in terms of those efforts that are being done. I know through the mayor's office and all through the government relations team. I think one of the compelling themes out of that slide 22 is that ever-growing municipal share to deal with this issue, and the shrinking federal and provincial share. So that's one of the reasons why we thought that it'd be important to kind of pull that information together in terms of just the sustainability of funding this challenge in this way.
Thank you, through the chair. Really appreciate that. And I think my second and last question, just seeking again confirmation of something that was said throughout the presentation and just looking to make sure I'm understanding that right, through you, Chair, to Director Robichaud. I heard that we're not going to be able to build our way out of this. Would you be able to clarify what that means? I'm imagining it means we're looking at the spectrum of housing, and it's not just that we're building new, but are you able to kind of elaborate on that commentary that we won't just be able to new build our way out of this?
Through Chairman to the Council, that is correct in terms of what the market is delivering versus what the needs are. There is a disconnect. So the market is either building investor units, which are very small, which may meet that affordable ownership definition that their condominium is created and sold. It may rent for, but the average rents are $2,300 a month, which is higher than that 30% threshold. So, and then we have that disconnect between what is being built versus what are the needs. So those investor-driven units may be a 1-bedroom unit, whereas we have that need for a 2-bedroom or larger units for that full continuum of housing needs, and also providing for those multi-generational housing opportunities. So, and historically, you know, just as we bring more units on, we're enabling, I say, like, you know, it's like bringing a horse to water. We can't make the horse drink. So we can increase those housing opportunities on a citywide basis, but then it still becomes the landowner making that decision to create those additional dwelling units. So we can remove regulatory barriers, we can minimize the approvals required, but it still takes then the landowner to decide to execute on that. But then the question is, what do they build? When do they build it? And then what is that price point? So it still will require, you know, intergovernment intervention, federal, provincial, municipal, in order to meet that full continuum of housing needs. Following up on your earlier question, one of the things we are working on the Housing Secretariat is developing a housing needs assessment that would essentially be that housing master plan. So should there be a federal program, then that would be a plan that we could, staff and council could point to say, here is our plan and our strategy, and as Mr. Thorne was indicating, this is how our submission meets provincial objectives, but it's sort of being pre-approved by council in terms of dealing with it. So it'll enable the city to react to those opportunities quickly by having all that documentation that we do. Much like we do with infrastructure master plans, we will be having this housing master plan in the form of a housing needs assessment that'll speak to it to help address some of those programs as they come available and address those needs. Because simply relying on the market to get there won't happen.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, those were my questions. I think those were very clear answers. Just the smallest, quickest comment is just, I think we have more than just a funding barrier. It seems that there's also a policy barrier in provincial-federal relations, and we know who eats the overages when this problem doesn't get fixed. It's us. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jackson, please.
Yes, Budget Chair Danko, thank you. Good morning, and thanks to Directors Robichaud, Lewis, and Baird for an excellent, outstanding presentation. Just a few quick questions to get some clarification. On your one slide, Director Baird, you showed the under the total net housing investments, city share 56%, reserves 14%, province 24%, Fed 6%. So I add all four categories to get 100%. In other words, my question is the 14% reserve doesn't deduct from the 56% city. It's in addition to the 56% on the levy. Through you, Budget Chair Danko.
Through the chair, Mike Zagarek, General Manager of Finance Corporate Services. Councillor Jackson, you're correct. The reserve contribution is over and above the levy contribution.
Okay, thank you, General Manager Zagarek. Just to follow up on financial again, under another chart, it showed, that's the one, the $22 million from reserves municipally. So 22 million, we've learned recently that 12 million now makes up 1%. So is that roughly 2% of the 7.9% in housing put towards the proposed budget of 24? Am I doing my arithmetic correctly? Through you, Budget Chair Danko, or can somebody explain or correct me?
To the chair, that's correct. It would be just short of the equivalent of a 2% residential tax increase.
Okay, so thank you, General Manager Zagarek. 2% of that 7.9 is for the housing. All right. And under council referred items, referred investments, again, the net amount that do not have asterisks beside them is roughly 12 million of the 16.5. So through you, Budget Chair Danko, to General Manager Zagarek, we'll keep things consistent. Is that an additional 1% of the 7.9, or was that 12 million roughly that doesn't have asterisks beside it? Is that 1% captured in the previous 2% you just indicated to me? Through you, Budget Chair Danko, please.
To the chair, if the councillor can just repeat the question, sorry.
Sure, not at all. So on this chart of the council referred General Manager Zagarek, I'm looking down the net dollar amount. The final amount is 16.5. I'm not including the asterisk amounts, so I'm just asking the ones that don't have asterisks amount to roughly $12 million. Is that an additional 1% part of the 7.9, please? That's proposed for 2024 globally.
Through the chair, yes. It would represent part of that 22 million on the previous slide. And just to bring it all together, let me be a little more specific on my previous answer. That 22 million is that 1.6% that you would have, you may recall from Friday's presentation in terms of that pie breakdown of the 7.9%.
Okay. So almost 2% of the 7.9, 1.6 to about 2 is part of the 7.9. Thank you for all the financial clarifications. Budget Chair Danko, only because Director Robichaud referenced as part of the housing plan, secondary dwelling units, would you just please allow me a little bit of latitude? I know typically this question may be at Standing Committee of Planning, but only because Director Robichaud introduced it. If I could just ask through you to Director Robichaud, there is some, I'll state my own editorial, there is some ugly secondary dwelling units of monster proportions that exceed principal residence on some private properties that are being built. I understand I was against the whole matter last term, so be it. I'm trying to understand it's the suitability, the appropriateness, and the reasonableness. Budget Chair Danko, you and I had a chat many months ago about some of the secondary dwelling units that are being built. Director Robichaud, was this always envisioned that an SDU potentially would exceed the size of a principal residence on the same property? Through you, Budget Chair Danko, please.
So just as a reminder, we do have a departmental presentation for planning and economic development on Friday. So perhaps that would fit better there, but our chief planner is at the microphones. Go ahead.
My apologies, Budget Chair Danko, and I'm fine either way. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Do you want me to?
Just briefly.
Very briefly, through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor. In the zoning bylaw, first of all, the province does require that municipalities in their zoning bylaw permit up to 3 units on a lot, or the conversion of an existing dwelling to contain 2 dwelling units. The city's official plan has policies around that. After extensive consultation, we developed updated zoning regulations, and in the bylaw, it requires that the detached secondary dwelling unit be smaller than the principal residence. However, there are exceptions in how that gross floor area is calculated. So an existing accessory building with a detached garage, those parking space areas are not part of the GFA, so it becomes how the bylaw is administered, that in the cases where you end up building on top of a detached garage, it seems that that building is bigger than the principal residence because it's a technical calculation, because the parking spaces are not habitable space. Thank you.
Thanks, Director, and thanks, Budget Chair Danko. I'd wrap up on the financial, my comment. I'll take a different tack than some previous speakers in terms of stepping up municipally so that the feds and province are more impressed with us. I'll take the opposite tact and say what a shame that the federal and provincial portions are declining and decreasing, and the municipality has had to put more from the levy into housing. I think the province and the feds, Budget Chair Danko, are wiping their brows, applauding the city, and standing back without contributing more. Thanks, Budget Chair Danko.
Thank you, Councillor. On our speakers list, Councillor Nan, followed by Councillor Kretsch, and myself. Go ahead.
Thank you, Budget Chair, and thank you, Directors and Chief Planner, for the presentation and overview. I just wanted to clarify the 7,606 RGI units across the city as being a below service standard, and the general pot in our community housing sector across the city is 14,000 units. So that leaves about 6,000, not about, at least 6,394 units that are within our community housing stock that are currently being occupied at a market rent rate. And Director Baird, you mentioned that part of the stuckness, excuse me, in our, excuse me, in our ability to meet the 6,100 on our wait list is that those units are occupied by market rent occupants. Correct. Got it. So my question is, in terms of the strategy that's been outlined here, is it my assumption that then moving towards the market housing strategy, the work that is being funded partly by the incentive programs and our $96 million from the Fed's investment to the city to build new, are we going to see a direct line there in terms of how we're using our strategy from those federal funds to help address exactly that below service standard?
Through the chair, so I'll take a kick at this one. So you're absolutely correct. So within those social housing, community housing units, they're not all RGI units. I would say, though, for those additional units that are there, those are affordable units. So they are still, although they're market, they're at that low end of market affordable place. Right. So what we would need to see is other affordable units brought online elsewhere that would allow those folks to move, or for new, even at mid to high end of market, units would allow opportunity. Right now there's just the continuum overall. Folks are stuck where they are. So what we want to see is that supply issue addressed at the upper ends, if you will, on the continuum to see some movement happening.
Of the affordable market rate.
Of the affordable market rate.
Correct.
Although also at the other end of the market rate, because there are folks right now that are in affordable units that are looking for opportunity as well. And so when I spoke earlier about needing the whole continuum to be healthy, in fact, we want to see growth in supply across the continuum in order to allow those movements to happen. We would also want to see, though, expansion of our existing social housing units so that we have additional RGI units available overall.
So including, Chair, new build for community housing as well as along the continuum. Can Director Baird, could you also comment to the role that those affordable market rent rates play for our community providers? My understanding is that those rent rates enable our community service providers community housing providers to finance some of their services as a result of those rates being higher than RGI.
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct, that they do rely on those low end of market rates in order to maintain their operation. So they do need a healthy mix of both.
Thank you. And then the second question, and Chair, happy to defer it to Friday if that's the appropriate place for it. Under the council referred items, I just did some quick math and not my strongest suit, but however, I attempted. The Hamilton rental apartment program items that are listed there include the tenant support program, the renovation license and relocation listing bylaw, and the safe apartments bylaw. And so when I itemize those three, that brings us to about a 2.4, just shy of $2.4 million council referred investments that are tied to that program. So just to clarify, are there additional costs other than those three line items that we see here today, which will be clarified on Friday?
So through the chair, not additional costs. We can speak in a bit more detail about what those amounts cover in terms of how many staff and those sorts of things. I know we've had some questions as well about the sequencing of those bylaws. So we're doing some work right now in that regard, but not any additional costs. I would note there is but it is built into the numbers you see there. There's a capital component to those costs as well related to vehicles and bylaw enforcement. So those are included within these numbers.
The capital, sorry, through you, Chair, just to clarify what I heard, the capital components of those bylaws is integrated in the numbers that we see on this slide?
Oh, sorry, through the chair, they were on the previous slide. My apologies. No, so they are not included in these net levy impacts. It was mentioned on the earlier slide, the capital impact. So we can break that down a bit more detail on Friday.
Perfect. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kretsch, followed by Councillor McMeekin and myself. Councillor?
Thanks very much. My first question was sort of similar to the mayor's first question in terms of those kinds of larger spaces we see that are open. I wanted just to ask a little bit of a more detailed question about capital versus operating costs for those kinds of spaces, because we often see a building, sometimes a building has been well taken care of. Sometimes it's been disconnected from all of the different, water, electrical, those kinds of things, and kind of left for a long period of time. Those are kind of capital things that need to be done, but then the operating piece. And so can you break down sort of like where you see the major investment would be required to make those things functional? In like broadly speaking, I'm not specifically speaking to any one place, like, just breaking down like capital versus operating costs. Where you see the biggest challenge, I guess, yeah.
So through the chair, in many cases, it might depend on the facility that's available and the type of capital repair that's needed, or if there's a capital purchase required overall. The most significant investment, though, often is the operating costs, the staffing costs to, if it's an emergency shelter or, even a temporary shelter situation, we're looking at 24/7 staffing, and those operating costs are often the more significant piece, whereas the capital investment might be a one-time investment that we're looking at. It's really hard, without knowing the specifics of the particular location, it's hard to define that.
Yeah, I understand. I'm not asking for anything definitive. I'm just trying to understand broadly, what's possible. It seems like we're trying our best to find solutions, despite the fact that there's no one answer at the moment. We're managing a crisis, and in managing that crisis, sometimes we have to do things that are unconventional. I had questions about the chart you had up for what you're calling council referred items. And I had some questions about a few of these things, just to break them out a little bit more, I think, for the public and for everyone here, in terms of what some of these things might really mean. When we talk about the winter response strategy, I see a significant investment for next year. My understanding, or that's what we're doing here, is we're changing the plan up for a winter response strategy. We're investing more into it, and that we'll be making some changes to that programming in the future.
Through the chair. So yes, on winter response in past years, you'll know that the response very much was tied to the cold alert trigger. And so there might be only a handful of nights in a season where we needed to have a winter response in place. So the response overall was quite limited. We've changed that strategy. And so now we're in a place where winter response operates, I guess you would call it seasonally. And so it's operating from December 1st till March 31st annually. That's because we know that not only the cold trigger alone is not reasons alone for why we need to give people opportunity to get out of the cold. And so when we operate it seasonally, we're able to plan for it in advance. So council will see something come forward likely around June of 2024 of what the proposed ongoing and sustainable winter response looks like. The costs that you see here are covering what we have in place right now for this portion of 2024, but on an ongoing basis, we'll have an ongoing winter response as opposed to putting a last minute emergency measure in place to address a cold alert that happens today. So it really is part of a holistic approach, I would say, to how we're dealing with the folks that are unhoused overall.
Thank you. I could talk about that more, but this probably is not the forum for it. So I want to delve into a couple more things here. The end of mortgage strategy and implementation that we're funding from the reserve. I wanted to ask if you could just speak to how that relates to our acquisition fund, or if it does at all. So we talk larger in terms of the Housing Secretariat, in terms of acquiring buildings. It's my understanding this doesn't actually address that issue at all. Could you speak more to? I think that's the first thing people think of when they hear end of mortgage. They think, uh-oh, the building's up for a mortgage. That means that somebody could invest in purchasing that building to keep those services going. I don't think that amount of money would possibly address the amount of buildings we're talking about reaching end of mortgage. So could you maybe unpack that slightly more?
Through the chair. So I'll talk about this particular item, and you're right, it's not related to end of mortgage in general with respect to, general private apartments within the building, within the city. This particular item is about our housing providers, the not-for-profit housing providers that have agreements or mortgages either federally or provincially, and they're at the end of their mortgage contract. And so in order to keep those buildings, those units within our community housing portfolio, we are in a place to try to support them financially. So this particular money will help those not-for-profit providers who come to end of agreement find capital funding to maintain their units, maintain their building in good repair in order that we can keep them within that portfolio. Director Lewis might want to talk about the acquisition strategy, but it's very separate from, you're good with that?
Yeah,
it's a separate initiative completely from this.
Yeah, that's all I want to just make sure I can confirm. My last question is about the investments that we made into City Housing Hamilton last year, what we're doing this year, and the sustainability of that going forward. So we know that every year we're having to turn over units at City Housing Hamilton, and that City Housing Hamilton is working as a board to try and drive the vacancy rate down so it's somewhere more to sort of the average it should be. One of the great things we did to accomplish that last year was invest in repairing almost 500 units. Great, that's a great start. We dealt with a bit of a backlog there, but that continues to grow. It will continue to grow every year if it's not addressed, because primarily City Housing Hamilton's budget isn't really have much in terms of the way of maintenance. So it's not structured as an organization to have a lot of money to maintain the buildings and keep them in good repair over the life. So there's always this kind of competition or attrition of units that gets added to the long list. I see we're spending on CHH redevelopment of $180,000 this year, which is not related to that, I realize. But we're not investing this year in repairing units. So, okay, when's our next investment plan? What's the plan for that? How can we make that a sustainable part of the city's budgeting so that we're not coming forward at one fell swoop and saying we need to invest, between $6 and $10 million every year, but we're making sure that we're adequately keeping on top of that so the vacancy rate stays low.
Through the chair. So that's a very good question because we do want to see those units online. For CHH, for City Housing Hamilton, the investment last year to bring units online, they're still doing that work to finalize bringing those units online and have a good sustainable plan in place of how they keep their vacancy rates in line with what would be sort of those CMHC set expectations. The other piece of work that's happened out of that is over the past year, Housing Services has worked with City Housing Hamilton to look at their budget overall. City Housing Hamilton, again, although one of our community housing providers, certainly our largest, it has about 50% of our stock. They have both market and RGI units, so we've worked with them to better understand how do we ensure that their budget allows them to operate effectively through the course of the full year, as opposed to before they were finding themselves a place that maybe 3/4 of the way through the year, they did not have those operating dollars available. We found a sustainable solution for them for this year and coming into 2024. They are, though, bringing, doing some CQI work themselves, bringing a consultant on board to look at what does their budgeting look like overall and how do we sustain this so that they are in a place where they're not falling behind, where that they have the budget and resources to constantly maintain their units. So lots of CQI work happening there across our division with CHH, and I think good work that you'll hear more about.
Thanks very much. I'm grateful to hear that there's a sustainable plan for that because I know that it's something that, as it continues to surprise us or continues to come up for us at the sort of proverbial last minute, it creates a pressure that is hard to manage over the long term. Thanks. Thanks for the answers to the questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McMeekin, followed by Councillor Pauls and myself. Councillor McMeekin.
Thanks, Chair Danko, and thanks for the presentation. I found it particularly helpful to see the continuum. And it occurs to me, an observation and then a question, that it would be nice if we had a shared sense of purpose with all different levels of government vis-a-vis a continuum. Governments choose what kind of continuum they want to focus on. In the municipal situation, we have legislation requiring us to focus on certain parts of the continuum relating to the market economy, limited ability to work outside of the market economy, although that's an option that some municipalities explore. We have to do the whole continuum legislatively or out of a requirement that people not die on the streets. You know, and I was at a community meeting recently where there was some painful reference to homelessness and how we were handling that. And I tried to make the point that if the expectation was that anyone around this horseshoe would not support people not dying on the street, you should give your head a shake and think again, because that's not where we're at. In an ideal world, we'd be working together, and that would be the right thing to do. And we would have a shared sense of continuum across the broad scope. But that, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be the case. So we've gone from reaching home in 2019 to today. And we're making progress. We're at least warming centers and shelters, and what we're doing is helping. But if we want to change the losing situation, I would hesitate ever to call it a game. You know, people write about these things. We've got to find ways to more fruitfully engage the federal and provincial governments. So my question is about that. What specific comments can you make, or would you hazard to make, about improving partnership relationships with two senior levels of government who seem to have decided to go down the market portion of the continuum to broaden their horizons? And do we have a strategy to do that? Because I'm a simple guy from the sticks. You know, the reality is fundamentally things aren't going to change until we can get them engaged. I assume this is something that's happening across many municipalities. I know different municipalities are taking different actions, Kitchener, Waterloo, Peterborough, London, Ford, that I draw some inspiration from. But can you comment on partnership, the need for partnership, what we're doing to build the partnerships? Do we have insiders that are working on that? I know we've got two great reps, one an AMO rep and an FCM rep who are working with colleagues in Ontario and across the country. But that's what's got to change here. I say that respectfully. I'm not aiming that at anybody. You know, I understand. Listen, let me say this publicly. I'm very proud. I'm very proud of what we've been able to do as a city in response. I lament that we've had to go down some paths, but I'm proud of what we've done and what we will be doing, and we're not going to let people die on the streets. But the partnership issue is something I want you to comment on, or somebody to comment on. The bench, anybody who's got any semblance of an answer. Thanks.
So through the chair, I'll take a crack at it, and you'll hear a little bit more about this on Thursday when the city manager's budget presentation is in front of you around the investment made in government relations. And I would say much of the focus of that government relations work at both the staff level and I know at the political level as well with the mayor and council's representatives on those bodies that you mentioned, AMO, FCM, et cetera, has very much focused on the housing file. I hope that in presenting the information this way, for one, it just puts the information together in one place, which is part of informing those discussions that happen with the other levels of government, and putting it in such a way that it is talking about the full continuum. Because I do know that in talking to both the provincial and federal government, sometimes you're talking about one spot on the continuum, sometimes you're talking about another spot on the continuum, and to kind of always keep it together as a collective conversation, I think is important locally in terms of how we approach our work, but also the message that we're bringing to the federal and provincial governments in terms of where the need lies.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Pauls?
Thank you. On page 2, I love the diagram, the visual slide. You have homelessness, and you could put it up. Emergency shelter, transitional, supportive community, affordable, and market. As I look at that, I have emails from people. They don't look at the affordable housing. They look at the homelessness. And I see a big divide there. There's a lot more steps to be done before we get to the affordable housing. Matter of fact, I could tell you that there's people that have good jobs that can't afford a house. So it is not the homeless. The people out there that are emailing say, what are you doing for the person that doesn't have a roof on their heads? And I find where we need to be focused on affordable housing, but we should be focusing more on the emergency shelters, transitional housing. To me, the best is supportive housing. That's where we need it the most, and community housing. My question is, when people email me and say, oh, we don't have enough affordable housing, we need those people on the street to go to affordable housing. That's not what we do. We can't. They can't afford affordable housing. So my question is, you said something from community housing, which is geared to income, right? Some of them are, a provider. Do you help, and let's say they're doing much better. You said something, they want to move out of rent to income, so we have more geared to income. Does the city help out the allowance difference to affordable housing?
Through the chair, in some cases, yes, if individuals need support. So when we talk about different types of rent supplements, rent supports, we have the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, for example. Lots of those folks that receive supports like that are not in community housing. They could be in other types of affordable or market housing, for example. When we think about sometimes people need supports with first and last month's rent in order to secure housing, and those folks aren't necessarily in rent geared to income units, but rather other market rent opportunities, and we do have programs to support those individuals as well. I appreciate what you're saying with respect to when we look at this continuum, and that's sort of why I flagged that when we talk about community housing, it's actually the largest part of our social safety net when it comes to housing. However, the issues we're experiencing around homelessness are very visible to people, and so that's what people are seeing, and people care about their community, care about their neighbors, and when they see those individuals that truly are sleeping unsheltered, they're seeing that as the need, and that's why at the outset we wanted to say that the need is actually across the whole continuum. Those individuals that are experiencing homelessness might be in our emergency shelters, certainly highly vulnerable individuals that need support, and we need investment there, but that's not the only place that we need to invest. In fact, we want to live in a community where all of these pieces of the continuum are functional, they're healthy, and that we have the supply we need.
Oh, definitely, but I'm just saying what people see is not the market housing or the affordable housing. They see the housing's cut from the beginning, from that bench, and that's important. We say we have 6,110 waiting on the list. Waiting on the list does not mean these people are homeless. They're waiting. They have houses. Can you just explain that? Because as you said, it's 883. They have chronic homelessness. Those are the people that we see outside. Can you explain that for me?
Yes, and through the chair, this is one that is a bit complicated. We've talked about it here a number of times. So we have two different groups of individuals, and there is some overlap. So individuals that are experiencing homelessness, individuals that are chronically homeless, for example, they're on something called the by name priority list. That list of individuals is that group of 1,600 that I talked about in the homelessness data, and that group of individuals truly are unhoused. They might find themselves in shelters, they might be in some type of temporary housing, but they are interacting with the homeless serving sector. The group of 6,000 individuals who are on the access to housing wait list, those are individuals who basically from a place of means and their income, they are eligible for those affordable RGI units, for example. However, because of supply issues, we aren't able to get them. You're absolutely right, not all those individuals are homeless. There are parts of that 6,000 list that would be duplicated, if you will. The same individual could be on the by name priority list, also on the access to housing wait list. That's the ideal situation that we want, so people are waiting for housing. However, on that group of 6,000, individuals might be underhoused, meaning perhaps it's a mom and 3 children who find themselves still living in a small, maybe a 1-bedroom or studio apartment while they're waiting for something more appropriate to open up. Or individuals could be perhaps overhoused or need housing that's accessible to meet their current needs. So as we kind of go through our lifespan, needs change. So these individuals might very well be housed. They might be unhoused, but a lot of them are housed. They're just not housed appropriately for what they need right now.
Thank you. I have one question, one more, really short, actually.
Go ahead, Councillor.
We talked about long-term care, supportive housing. That's a supportive housing. We talked about residential care, and you said something about we have 1,100 residential care facility, and some are expanding. I'm wondering, you said we subsidize 800 of them. Can you tell me what percentage the city gives and what the province gives, or are they all different?
Through the chair. So when we talk about the 800 subsidized residential care facilities beds, our subsidy comes partially from that provincial homelessness prevention program budget, but partially, of course, from the city as well. We don't know what portion necessarily that we subsidize versus there might be some private paying component of that, but the subsidy that we pay is the same for all of our subsidized home. So what the operator gets is a per diem amount, so they get an amount per resident per day to meet the care needs of those. It's not necessarily care needs, it's basically the operational needs to operate their home. We provide the subsidy for that.
That's great. Do you know the amount that the province gives?
Through the chair. So it's not actually an amount through the province. The full amount flows through the city. It just happens to be that's part of the funding source.
Okay. Thank you. And again, I love the visual. I think I'm going to take a picture and send it to all my constituents that call me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark, followed by myself, and Mayor Horvath for a second time. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can I get an understanding, the shelters that are operating in the city of Hamilton, are they funded by, or do they receive any funding from senior levels of government, or do they only get their funding from the city of Hamilton?
Through the chair. So the shelters that are operating, the emergency shelters, we fund them through the city of Hamilton. It's not their only source of funding. They have some charitable donations, philanthropic, that kind of dollars, but their funding flows through us.
So there's no funding from the province for emergency shelters?
Through the chair. So the province, the homelessness prevention program budget, so it's approximately $28 million. That money is what we receive from the province to administer and fund those shelters. They might have extenuating circumstances where they have specific programs perhaps that they administer through a shelter, but the actual emergency shelter operations are funded through that budget through us, as well as any funding that they have through their charitable sources.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to drill down a little bit further on that, if you don't mind. So the province provides the city $28.5 million. They announce that they are committed to funding the homelessness crisis in Hamilton, and they used the term 29 million. That was their quote. How much are we actually spending on emergency shelters and the homeless in Hamilton?
Through the chair. So you're absolutely right. So that provincial program is expected to fund the needs of the homeless crisis in Hamilton, the homeless needs overall. We pay for things like shelters through that. Some of those diversion projects, programs that I talked about, we'd pay through that particular funding, staffing costs, of course, to administer those programs. And so the costs that we have exceed that $28 million. I don't have the total homelessness dollars in front of me. I can get it for the next presentation. We do have it. It far exceeds that $28 million. When I talked about before the example of family homelessness in particular, that $6 million that we pay in hotels, only less than $2 million of that is coming through the $28 million, where the levy is picking up the difference. So the levy is actually picking up that difference on a lot of the homelessness fronts right now. I would say too that the 28 million or the 29 million that the province gives us, that is a static amount for the next couple of years. We don't have an increased investment there either.
And did we provide an increase in funding to the shelters? The city of Hamilton, mind you, not the province. Did the city of Hamilton provide an increase in funding to the shelters?
Through the chair. So yes, in 2023, we provided a cost of living increase to shelter providers. Shelter providers were finding themselves in a place they hadn't had a funding increase in years. Their ability to recruit and maintain the staffing that they had was just not possible on their existing budget. So the city of Hamilton, through the levy, provided for that COLA increase.
Thank you. Chair, may I ask Director Baird that in the next presentation, if she could find those numbers for us, it would be really helpful. I'd like to switch to another area if I have time.
Yep, go ahead.
We're seeing a great deal of housing applications being approved in the city of Hamilton in the last 2 to 4 years. In Ward 9, a significant number, and yet it seems that we're seeing a retraction in how much is being built. The lots are sitting empty, no housing is being built after it's been approved. So do we have statistics that verify the amount of applications that we have approved at the city of Hamilton versus the number of site plans that are now underway? Not in the planning stage, but actually they're building them.
Through Mr. Chairman, to the councillor, what I can tell you is, in speaking with our chief building official, approximately, he issued building permits that would have allowed for about 4,500 units in 2023. That translated into about 3,700 housing starts. So on average, about 10% of building permits are never acted on for some reason. But in terms of you are correct in terms of that disconnect between what is approved, what gets approved at a site plan stage, building permit stage, then actually under construction. And working with building staff, we are starting to develop that sort of dashboard and tracking that between building permit activity issuance versus housing starts. And on the assumption that at the building permit stage, they've either received the zoning, the site plan, or they can go straight to a building permit.
Thank you. This is not directly related to the presentation. It's my last question. Are we seeing or hearing from developers and builders that they're not proceeding because their lines of credit or their surety bond, the interest on them is so high, they simply can't proceed? Are we hearing any of that rumbling?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we are hearing is that the sales office traffic has dropped to almost zero. So effectively, some developers have closed the sales office. Some developers have foundations poured, but they're not advancing because there's no market uptake. There are some projects, just anecdotally, we're hearing that they're not advancing it because they're having to reimagine the project based on higher construction costs and other associated costs. This is a bigger issue. In fact, right now we are having discussions with the province because the minister announced, I think last month, this use it or lose it legislation framework. They have not sort of released any discussion paper around what that would look like, but the province is very eager in hearing from municipalities as to what tools or what is required to get that sort of supply on paper translated into units on the ground. And I anticipate, based on what the commentary coming from the minister and from provincial staff is, that the next housing supply action plan will contain some component to address this issue of use it or lose it, where we may have a developer not advancing their subdivision so other projects can advance, or that should there be, for example, in site plans, after 2 or 3 years, those approvals lapse, or how does it relate to some of the DC discounts? So those are all the issues the province is asking about, but they haven't sort of issued any formal discussion paper in terms of what that framework would look like at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you. The remainder of my questions are much too involved here, so I'll take them offline and then come back to this committee at an appropriate time. Thank you.
I think that it's also a really important topic that we can pick up on Friday in the departmental presentation. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maureen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Sincere thanks for the complete overview and the depth of responses. Such encyclopedia minds, having all that information at hand and remembering it. Thank you. I just have a single question, and not surprisingly, it relates to our, there's a lot of discussion out there about the federal government's intent, apparently, on capping international students. And in the Housing Sustainability and Investment Roadmap, we have identified housing for students, both as a challenge, but also something that has had impact on our overall housing. And I'm wondering, what are the next steps in this? I know it is a budget presentation, Chair, but our efforts to try and work with that in an effort to try and address this housing stress that is causing us financial stress. Thank you, through the Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, for the purposes of doing our growth forecasts, we have always applied what we used to call the census undercount to address for those sort of non-permanent residences, students, and individuals that are not in a traditional home, i.e. in a long-term care facility. And that was for the purposes of, for our public works colleagues, understanding what the implications were, but also for us to ensure that we've been dealing with that. So we have always built the sort of the student population into our growth forecast when we're looking at that 110,000 households. So it's being contained there. it's actually been growing at a faster rate than that 5%, so it does create some additional pressures there. But with the housing target or the housing pledge to 2031, we have 47,000 units. That's a larger number than the 30,000 units that we were originally planning for to that 2031 time period. So we've been trying to look at that enabling framework to accommodate that higher rate of household formation and household growth within the city. Again, it's enabling, i.e. that we're allowing for the creation of the conversion of a single detached dwelling into multiple units, but it's still up to the property owners as to whether or not they want to take advantage of that from that perspective. And what we are seeing too is our partners like McMaster now with the new building being built in the downtown, they are student residents occurring throughout the entire city in dealing with it, but it is something that we have been sort of factoring in. As part of the conversations we've been having with our university partner, though, we have asked them to link sort of their campus growth in terms of classroom space with what does that mean from a student population household need, and to think about that in their decision-making exercise. So if McMaster is adding 5,000 students, where are they going to reside? Are they going to be residing in the community? Will they be commuting on transit, or will they be living in the neighborhoods? And what does that mean, or what share of that growth should be accommodated on campus? So it is being part of the conversation with the university. They're arguing that their financial model makes it very difficult to deliver new student residences, but at the very least to be cognizant that when they're expanding their campus footprint, that they're factoring in what are the impacts on the broader neighborhood and the community is part of that sort of whole of city, looking at their growth as they relate to the campus development.
Thank you. Through the chair, I would suggest that calculation has been absent for the last 30 or more years. Just anecdotally sharing a story with my colleagues, because this does have a real impact on the availability of market supply. Someone noted in the Westdale neighborhood the other evening that there was what's going on? There is a lineup around the block outside what looks like a single-family dwelling. And what we were able to determine, I believe, was it was just a viewing for student units. So when we talk about the cost of post-secondary education, whether it be at the college or whether it be at the university, we know that for middle-income families, the cost of housing is significant on the portion of what that family is having to endure, and also the quality of that housing is not necessarily something that you would desire your child to have to live in for 4 years. And it's always been my position that having to live in housing that is perhaps not healthy or not safe, it's not a rite of passage for students, and it should not be acceptable. So I'm very pleased that we're moving ahead on the licensing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to ask you to take the chair.
Thank you.
So I do have a couple questions on slide 22, if we could go back there. And I do appreciate having this in one format that we can share with residents. So my first question is about the $93.5 million Housing Accelerator Fund, which I think we've all celebrated as a huge achievement and support from the federal government for the city of Hamilton. But it's not included in the actual federal component. So I'm wondering how it might be included in future years, or how that figures in.
GM Zagarek, or?
Through the chair, we can take that away and look at the nature of those investments with respect to the continuum. So recognizing that the majority of these investments are towards housing and homelessness, while there is a portion of the approximately $94 million that will be available towards affordable housing, the majority of those funds are towards increasing housing supply. So, So in the context of the continuum, we can look at how that best aligns.
Thank you. My second question is still on this chart and some of the figures that have been presented. So I'm seeing a $170 million investment in 2024 from all levels of government. But specifically locally, I believe the increase from 2023 to 2024 went from 76 million to 119 million, an increase in $43 million from local City Hamilton taxpayers through both reserves and levy. But when I hear from residents, it's still, you're not doing anything. What are you doing? You need to do more. Because I think people are still, going to the park and, having to interact with people that are leaving needles behind. They're seeing tents, on the street. They're going shopping and having potentially troublesome interactions. And, they want to know that their tax dollars are addressing the problem. So with that level of investment versus the level of the problems that we're facing, are we finding solutions? Are we getting people off the streets, or are we managing the greater problem as best we can?
Through the chair. So it's an excellent question, and you're absolutely right that we are doing a lot. I can tell you that a lot is happening along the whole continuum, as we talked about. Lots happening on that place where people are most vulnerable in the homelessness sector. However, we're still seeing that that 1,600 approximately people that I talked about, those individuals are still experiencing homelessness. And in many cases, we're trying to meet their needs where they are, recognizing that we simply do not have enough shelter spaces and we don't have access to housing, but it's even broader than that. And that's where I talked earlier about for individuals who are finding themselves, often those folks who are really unsheltered, that the complex interplay with addictions, mental health, lack of affordable housing, that incomes and income supports aren't where they are, that we are trying to pick up the pieces, if you will, for those individuals, do what we can, connect them into services where possible, bring them into housing, be it emergency housing, sometimes transitional housing, what have you. But until we have sufficient supply of affordable housing that has those supports in place for individuals, unfortunately, we've not been completely successful in bringing people out of homelessness. What I'll say too, though, is that we are seeing successes. When we look at where our homelessness numbers were last year, we certainly saw an increase over probably the first few months into the summer this year, but our numbers are, for the most part, where they are now, the same place they were at the beginning of 2023, which is, for the most part, good news. We are seeing increasing numbers of individuals in encampments. However, we are connecting with those individuals and trying to find supports and trying to connect them to the right services where we can. I think the other place where we're having a lot of success, and back to our earlier conversation, that homelessness, particularly those people who are unsheltered, is very visible in our community. And so we see those folks and want to have an impact, have a positive impact for them and address those issues. But in fact, there's lots of folks that are precariously housed. There's lots of folks that are in that social housing, community housing bucket, if you will. There's lots of folks that we're supporting through the tenant support program and with rent ready, rent support, that kind of thing. So on a day-to-day basis, a lot of those invisible social safety net sort of pieces are keeping people housed where they are and as much as possible. But it's that visible piece that we still see, and we still, although these investments, are going to keep us where we are and keep things moving forward, put some new strategies in place to keep affordable housing within Hamilton, there's still a ways to go, and the big piece really is around providing some supports for folks.
Thank you very much. And I think it is really important to highlight the total level of investment that we are making with all three levels of government, but also the successes that we are having as a city, as a municipality, even though that might not be, obvious to the general public. So thank you for highlighting that. On the total costs of housing and homelessness, so we talked about the Housing Accelerator Fund being market, and all departments of the city having a share of the total costs of housing and homelessness. But some of the other departments that have direct impacts, I'm thinking about paramedics, fire, police, municipal law enforcement, parks, waste management, library, HSR, public health, not to mention damage to city assets like washrooms, parks, stolen wires, vandalism, that kind of thing. Not expecting this as part of the budget, but have we attempted to reconcile like the total citywide impact of all of what housing and homelessness, the crisis that we're in has, that would be far beyond, I think, what we've captured here?
So through the chair, it's an excellent question, and yes, those kinds of costs we haven't tried to extrapolate into these numbers. If you look back at that slide 6, that housing continuum slide, in recognition of that, we did think it was really important to put that sort of often forgotten dark purple bar at the bottom, which is all of those support services. And it's, you know, there's just a few examples here. There's the ones you mentioned, but there's also just the finance staff, the legal staff, the HR, procurement, all of these sorts of support services that if those aren't in place, then we're not going to be successful in delivering all of these other investments that are being spoken about here. It's a challenge to kind of try to allocate each, you know, exactly how much time does procurement spend on a housing file versus other files in order to identify that here. But I would agree that there is a significant amount of other, you know, housing and homelessness related support services and impacted services that aren't captured in these numbers.
Thank you. I think that's a further question for another day, but you know, putting into context the total cost that this crisis is having is enormous. My last question, Deputy Chair or Vice Chair, if I still have time, is just on multi-year budgeting. So the budget plan that we saw on whenever it was, had the multi-year plans for reserves and also for levy. But I think the base assumption there is what is currently in the plans for housing and homelessness is what is in the plan for the multi-year strategy, that there's not going to be future years, and I think Councillor Spatafora made this point, there's not going to be more and more and more council-referred items coming onto this file, that what we have here, this is the plan moving forward. And to tack on to that, looking at 2026, 2027, when we lose provincial funding, where again, those pressures fall to the municipality and municipal taxpayers, I'm really concerned that, again, in future years, as the problem is still as critical as it is now, that there's going to be future budgetary pressures. And how are we going to address that multi-year?
Through the chair, I'll start, and if GM Zegarac wants to jump in, that's fine too. So the budget you see before you with the council referred items, you're correct that this includes the multi-year forecast. A number of the items here certainly aren't items that are going to be completed this year versus they stretch over the next few years of programming. So the costs you see here are what we're anticipating from a housing perspective over the next few years.
Yeah. Through the chair, I'll pick up from Director Baird's comments and maybe just build off of the word anticipating. It's the multi-year forecast is really based on best information that we have at this time. And information can improve our financial position, or it could create further challenges. We talked a bit around provincial funding, principally through the homelessness prevention program. And while we are anticipating based on communications from the province that the city's allocation of just short of $28 million a year will remain that way for the next 2 years. If that were to change to improve our position, we would provide that update to council, and that could have an impact to either reduce our reliance on reserves or improve outcomes for community. Again, the hope with respect to multi-year budgeting is it communicates to council and the community priorities and the investment strategy as it relates to satisfying those priorities. And my last comment will be, while staff have put forward a responsible, sustainable financing strategy, as you heard this morning, there are some assumptions with respect to investments that will sunset. We talked a bit about, and of mortgage investments of approximately $21 million. Those are forecast to expire at the end of 2027. So unless there is further commitments from senior levels of government, that could represent a future need and investment. But again, the expectation is continuing to have conversations to convey the value and opportunity with respect to those investments towards retaining existing housing supply.
Thank you. And just putting my cards on the table, just a final comment is, a $43 million year-over-year increase to this file is not sustainable. This is a major commitment for City Hamilton taxpayers, and we cannot continue to increase and pick up the slack from other levels of government. If we've got a plan, we need to be disciplined and stick to it. Thank you. So I'll take the chair back. Mayor Horvath, second time.
Thanks, Councillor Danko, and I'm sorry I had to be out for a minute. I just want to make a couple of quick comments. One is the disappointment in the response we got from the provincial government when we went in, I think it was November. We did hear back, as everybody knows, from the Minister of Housing that the 28 million is kind of it. I don't think that we accept that. We just keep going back at it, and they're in budget deliberations right now, as a matter of fact, so the time is now to be doing that work. And just to update folks, it's also the time to do the pressure piece around the hospitals, and the Ontario Big City Mayors are meeting with the Minister of the Treasury Board, or the Minister of Finance, I guess, actually, Minister Bethlehem Falvey, I think February 9th, to have a conversation about hospitals. Apparently, and I know it's not necessarily for today, but apparently every city is being treated differently when it comes to expectations around hospitals, so we need to nail that down. But the other piece, we did get some success with the federal government when it came to the asylum seekers and refugees. I think the bill was around $10–11 million that we put at their feet. I think they said they'd cover 3 point something of that. So we got a little bit of movement on that, which means we just continue to push for not only the rest of that money, but also commitments for this year. Let's see, the Minister of Health didn't really reply very much to our requests around some of those services, like the Dorothy Day services and the YWCA services, but the agencies have been asked to make sure that they're applying directly to the Ministry of Health for some of that funding so that we can support them in that effort. And then just on the issue of breaking out the provincial responsibilities that we're picking up as a city, the City of Guelph started this with their 8.52%. They're identifying that 3.96% is from the city, 1.87% is from the boards and outside agencies, and 2.69% of their 8.52 is provincial dollars that they're picking up on their local levy. So this is an effort that we're making, but it's also, I just wanted to let members of council know that it's also an effort that it's being made by other big cities and the Ontario Big City Mayors. And so on top of the work that Councillor Nan is doing federally and that Councillor Wang is doing at AMO, the big city mayors are doing some of that work as well. Just information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm seeing no further speakers. Councillor Pauls, second time.
I just wondering, last year, we, I think it was Councillor Francis that put a request to check the registry of people, not for the homeless, emergency shelter, transitional housing, supportive housing, but affordable housing, where people could register and say, I could afford $1,600, but not $1,800. And people say, oh, I have a basement that, I can rent it for that. Are we getting that report back? I remember that registry component. And like I said, it's not for the affordable, it's for affordable and market housing.
Through the chair, so my understanding of the registry was slightly different, I'll admit, and that I thought it was actually to address the issue of homelessness, and it was seeking opportunities for people to come forward should they have the ability to offer housing or shelter to those folks. And if I'm wrong, I can be corrected on that, but that was my understanding of what it was, as opposed to social or affordable housing opportunities. And so that report remains on our outstanding business list. We are working with within housing to bring that report forward, but there are legal and risk pieces as well. So you'll see that report come forward in 2024, yes.
Yeah, that's good, but like I said, I see the benefit of affordable housing for moving people from the community house of rent to income. If they have improved, but they could go into somebody's extra room or because, but not. But I agree with you. I think it was the other registry, right? So maybe we should do a registry for affordable housing and market housing. It's just out there, you know, you're thinking you want to move people from community housing where they were rent to income, but now they have a little bit more money, but maybe they can afford, you know, $1,500 or $1,600, and somebody has a basement for $1,700, and we could help them out that way. But anyway, that's just wondering. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So now seeing no further speakers, so with that, I need a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation, moved by Mayor Horvath, seconded by Councillor McMeekin. That carries unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the presentation from Healthy and Safe Communities. Chris Herstick, the Acting General Manager of Community Services, will provide the presentation for item 6.2. Depending on how many questions this generates, we'll see if we'll go through or if we'll break. So we'll hear the presentation first and then make that decision.
Good morning. Through the chair, Chris Herstick, Acting General Manager of Community Services. Today I'll be presenting the proposed tax-supported operating and capital budgets for the Healthy and Safe Communities Department. Today I'll be providing information on the department's level of service and the cost to maintain those services and the recommended enhancements and investments for the department. The budget presentation is slightly different this year as we are preparing to present the operating capital and enhancements for the department. The purpose for today's presentation is to share information with council and to answer any questions. No decisions or directions are required today. There will be additional budget deliberations on January 30th, and we anticipate budget approval on February 15th. So just to highlight that no decisions for the budget are required today. Healthy and Safe Communities is a large department. This organizational chart represents the approved complement across the 11 program areas. As Council is aware, the temporary measure to split the division, as General Manager Grace Mader is taking care of the Healthy and Safe Communities, and myself as Acting General Manager of Community Services. The proposed budget presented today is for the entire department. The leadership team is here in attendance today to answer any questions or provide additional information. The next few slides is an outline of the services that the department provides. The department delivers a broad array of social, recreation, and leisure programs that promote active lifestyles, community wellness, inclusive communities, and vibrant neighborhoods. These important services highlighted on this slide provide support to the housing and homelessness portfolio within the city, and I will be referring to additional investments in this area later in the presentation. The recreation programs and service promote healthy and active lifestyles to Hamilton residents and vibrant communities. The social services provided by our department provide subsidies for children and seniors and include benefits and services that benefit the most vulnerable individuals within the community. Public health services, fire and paramedic services provide so many vital services that help the needs of our neighborhoods and the residents within the city of Hamilton. Multiple initiatives of the department advance council priorities. The following are some select highlights. This list is by no means exhaustive. Hamilton, our healthy and safe community, has a role in meet council's objective to accelerate our response on climate change. Here are 3 examples of how we are contributing to that change. Public health effort to monitor the health effects of heat-related illnesses, Macassa Lodge's upcoming Capital B Wing redevelopment project, as well as accommodating 64 needed beds, 22 new. This project also includes sustainable design, alternative technologies, renewable energy sources, and energy-efficient equipment to reduce greenhouse gases. The third example is the Hamilton Fire Department adding anti-idling technology to 15 vehicles. This is an investment from the Climate Change Office. And within our golf courses, over 400 trees have been planted with the help of our good friends in forestry. Council has been clear that housing is a priority and the department has responded. To support housing advancement, Hamilton was awarded $93.5 million through the Housing Accelerator Fund program, $10.9 million through the Rapid Housing Initiative Round 3, and $2.5 million through the Ontario Priority Housing Initiative to create 2675 new residential units over the next 3 years, as well as to provide funding to move 2 projects totaling 168 new affordable housing units to construction. One of the highlights is to reduce the number of individuals who are homeless, and the department has implemented the approved encampment protocol. The development of the Bindigan Wellbeing Center will contribute to Council's objective for vibrant public spaces. The future Center of Integrated Health, Family, Social Housing Services will support and reflect Indigenous cultures and ways of knowing. With council support, we have expanded the menstrual products pilot program to provide free menstrual products in all recreation centers and municipal service centers, and continued funding of $91,000 to the Hamilton Food Share to distribute free menstrual products through the Emergency Food Network and food banks. The department has embraced council's objective to get more people involved in decision-making and problem-solving. The Indigenous Cultural Competency Training provided training and awareness of Indigenous cultures to the mayor, councillors, and over 600 people leaders within the city. Hamilton was approved funding of $2.5 million in federal investments from the Building Safer Communities grant to support 9 community-led initiatives that address youth violence through the prevention of comprehensive wraparound supports for youth over the next 3 years. The department has a continuous improvement mindset, and we have responded to those objectives by modernizing city systems across multiple divisions. This is an example of the items that were completed in recreation. So the 2024 proposed operating budget. This slide is a summary of the Health and Safety Communities Department tax operating proposed budget. To maintain existing servants or a maintenance budget, an increased investment of $16.2 million is required for 2024. That represents a department increase of 5.4%. There are 6 proposed staff-submitted business cases totaling an additional investment of $875,000, and Council has referred 17 initiatives to this year's budget. The total cost of these investments is $58.5 million, but through the financing strategy to utilize city reserves, the net increase to this year's budget is $15.9 million. I'd also like to highlight that the gross budget for the department is $851 million. This is inclusive of funding from upper levels of government. Within the Children's and Community Services Division, the operating increase for 2024 is net zero, as current reserves are proposed to fund the annual increase of $146,000. The Housing Secretariat Division is showing a year-over-year percentage increase of 166%. This increase is driven by a combination of consulting fees and salary and wages. No increase in FTEs or full-time equivalents is proposed for 2024 in this department budget. The summary does not reflect the proposed staff enhancements within the council-referred items and business cases. The department added 59.72 positions in 2023 through a number of year-end council approvals. Children's and Community Services added 6 positions, which were funded by the province. Paramedic Services added 7 positions. The Housing Secretariat added 2 positions. Long-term care added 41.7 positions, all funded by the province. Ontario Works added 0.5 of a position to support the Snow Angels program, and Public Health added 1 position for the health strategy specialist for the opioid response. The majority of Healthy and Safe Communities budget is sourced through upper levels of government, provincial and federal. Over 50% of the department's budget, or $451 million, is funded by the other levels of government. This is a greater degree than any other department. While council is responsible for the entire 854 gross budget, council only controls less than half of it. The levy contributes to $332 million, or under 40% of our total budget. The slide provided will give you a visual of the funding sources that cover the Healthy and Safe Communities gross budget of $852 million. You will recall this slide from GM Zagarik's presentation on Friday. The funding source allocation between the province and municipality is changing, and it has a negative impact on the levy. The programs that are considered cost share between the municipality and the province are represented on the slide. Over the last few years, these program areas have relied more heavily on municipal investment to meet the demands. Contrary to this trend is childcare services that has seen an additional investment to address the federal initiative of $10 a day childcare. So I'd like to propose to deliver the budget drivers for 2024. So the main budget driver is employer-related increases of $28.4 million. $22.2 million for salary, wages, and benefit increases is just for the department increase in employee-related. It does not include an additional $6.1 million in council-referred items and business cases. So $22.2 million for our maintenance budget and $6.1 million of additional employee-related costs in council-referred items and business cases. The next 4 budget drivers capture the additional investment the council has referred to this year's budget. $11.38 million for enhancements for homelessness, 4 council referred items, $10.33 million for new affordable housing investment, $8.11 million for supportive housing initiatives, additional 4 council referred items, $5.3 million in supportive housing, and this includes the end of mortgage strategy and implementation. I will go into greater detail on these investments when presenting the items council has referred to this year's budget. Additional budget drivers, $800,000 in contractual increases, $600,000 in fuel and energy. It was incorrect on the slide where it says it was a reduction. It was actually an increase of $600,000. Helping to reduce this year's budget is an additional $2.5 million in user fees and an increased funding of federal and provincial dollars of $12.6 million. The net levy contribution has been reduced by $30.45 million, so that the increase of the 2024 operating budget for the department is $33.09 million. So the department has some mitigation strategies that have been recommended. So to reduce the net operating budget, $27 million has been transferred from reserves, $23.76 million for council referred items, $2.45 million for business cases, and $780,000 to reduce property tax pressures. We also are recommending a deferral and efficiency and redundancies of $3.46 million. We are recommending to defer the 60 Caledon loan repayment of $1.25 million, defer the East Kiwanis redevelopment to 2026 of $280 million, cost reduction of the tenant support program and housing organizational effectiveness of $280,000, reduction in our employee-related costs of $320,000. We have realigned our hydro budget to meet actuals for $92,000. Our internal debt charges have been reduced of $180,000. We have deferred the encampment vehicle purchase of $90,000, and we have increased our gapping targets for the department of $140,000. This slide provides an overview of the 17 council-referred items for a total gross budget of $58.5 million, and the net investments is $15.9 million, required if all are approved. I will touch on each of these in the next few slides. Where the budget shows a net zero, the item has been funded by reserves and not levy. The encampment protocol implementation has a 2024 net levy impact of 0 and a gross annualized impact of $4.64 million. There's an associated staffing impact of 4 FTEs, and this is the permanent coordinated response team, which includes outreach staff in the housing services and support staff in parks and municipal law enforcement to manage encampments more effectively, ensuring safety and well-being of both residents and the surrounding community. Housing supports for women, transgender, and non-binary has a net levy impact of $3.6 million for 2024 and a gross annualized impact of $3.6 million. There are no FTEs included within this council-referred item. This is the annual operating subsidy to support the housing and supports the 73 individuals at Dorothy Day Place. The family shelter system is a net levy impact of 0, so reserves have been used for this item. The gross annual impact is $1.07 million. No FTEs within this council referred item. This is the extension of the temporary emergency supports to December 31st, 2025 to address urgent program and staffing needs within the Housing Services Division and Good Shepherd Hamilton related to family homelessness. The winter response strategy has a $3.2 million net levy impact for 2024 and a gross annualized impact of $3.2 million. No FTEs within this council referred item, and this is the enhanced winter response for homelessness serving the system. Tenant support program, the net levy impact is $890,000 with a gross annualized impact of $890,000. Included is 7 FTEs to this council referred item. This is the investment to grow the existing tenant defense program and expand beyond landlord-tenant board cases and enhance community resources and education capacity for teaching rights and responsibilities around tenant and landlord issues. Addressing needs of unsheltered individuals has a net levy impact of $2.82 million and a gross annualized impact of $17.8 million. This is the permanent ongoing funding for existing drop-in programs. The current funding expires March 31st, 2024, and continuation of 20 temporary emergency shelter spaces for single homeless women to December 31st, 2024. The continuation of 52 hotel rooms supporting family emergency shelter overflow hotel programs. The gross budget of $20.28 million, of which $14.9 million is funded from our COVID-19 reserve, and $10.33 million included to support new affordable housing investment. Housing charge and operating subsidy for 272 Caroline Street has a 2024 net levy impact of $90,000. This is to support 10 housing charge supplements and an operating subsidy for the 272 Caroline Cooperative Inc. City Housing Hamilton redevelopment is $180,000 to provide rent geared to income subsidy to all 45 units at City Housing Hamilton's project at 104-106 Bay Street. And Housing Services Division organizational effectiveness is a 2024 net impact, operating impact increase of $460,000 and 3 additional FTEs. This is for the implementation of Housing Services Division restructuring to better serve clients. End of mortgage strategy and implementation has a net levy impact of 0, funded from reserves. The gross annualized impact is $20.9 million. Additional 2 FTEs address capital needs of housing projects that are at the end of mortgage, end of agreement, and maintain them as affordable housing units. Housing Sustainability Benefit and Rent Ready Programs transformation has a net levy impact of this year for $3.75 million. Same as a gross annualized impact of $3.75 million. An additional 2 FTEs, and this is to revamp the Housing Stability Benefit and Rent Ready programs in one modernized and efficient program. The large volume hazardous storage database is for an additional net levy impact this year of $300,000. The gross annualized impact is $460,000. This is for 3 additional staff for the fire services. This project includes 3 fire prevention inspectors to create and manage a database and program conducting annual inspections to determine risks and initiating potential enforcement efforts under the Ontario Fire Code. And committee will recall, we've already approved the $620,000 for the emergency food and strategic planning. So the additional $625,000 is for addressing staffing and infrastructure expenses and partner food banks, but the gross annualized impact is $1.25 million. Monitoring local impacts of air pollution on mental and neurological health outcomes. The net levy impact for this year is 0, and the 1 FTE will be invested for 2024. The supervised consumption site evaluation, the net levy impact for 2024 is 0, 1 additional FTE. The investment will support the development and implementation of an evaluation framework to evaluate the impact of supervised consumption sites. The Healthy Babies, Healthy Children, net levy impact for this year is 0. Gross annualized impact is $220,000, and it is 0 FTE to be included this year, and this is to mitigate program pressures and maintain current staffing levels for 2024. And the menstrual product pilot project update, this is $32,000 impact for 2024, an additional gross annualized impact of $32 million. No FTEs to be included, but this is the continuation and expansion of the pilot program, providing various free menstrual products at 5 recreation centers. It now is to include all recreation centers, City Hall, and municipal service centers. The department has 6 submitted business cases for review today. The fire department has a business case to add 4 additional FTEs in the training division. This is required to meet the new legislation of the Ontario Fire Marshal's Office of certification for all the firefighters within the service. To add 4 additional dispatch and call-taking staff within the fire department. The 4 FTEs have a net levy impact of $270,000 this year and a gross annualized impact of double that. The slide is wrong, and I'll get to that at the end. So this is to provide staffing required levels to resource capacity to handle increasing call volumes, service levels, and to address the current employees' health, safety, and wellness. Emergency vehicle technician staff. This is to add 4 FTEs to our mechanical division. This is to meet the workload capacity requirements, included mandatory annual inspections and required maintenance needed to ensure fire department and paramedic service. This item has arisen in the last couple of years because of the increased fleet of ambulance that we have included within the department. This does have an annualized impact of double the $260,000, and the net levy impact for these 4 individuals is $260,000 for 2024. The long-term staffing business case is to add 2 administrative clerks to support the staffing requirements of the recently added 76.32 full-time equivalents in 2022 and 2023. These were provided by the province. This is a net levy impact of 0 for 2024, as we're proposing to use our current overtime budget to fund these 2 staff. The 2024 long-term care enhanced services to comply with the ministry directive. This is $890,000 gross annual impact. This is a net levy impact of 0 for this year, as this funding will be coming out of the existing COVID reserve. This item is to meet the provincial directives when we do have outbreaks within the lodges. And the ambulance staffing enhancement for 2024 has a net levy impact of 0. This will be funded out of a reserve. So this is to add an additional ambulance, all the related ancillary equipment, staffing to keep pace with the growing demand for emergency medical services within the community. This does have a gross annualized impact of $1.56 million, split 50-50 with the province. So the city's annualized impact is just slightly less than $800,000. So our department multi-year outlook, so to provide these services and maintain current services and to fund the council referred items and business cases for the future years, an additional investment in 25 for the department would be 9.2% increase. For 2026, it would be a 4.5% increase. And for 2027, the department increase would be $3.5 million, or sorry, 3.5%. So this slide shows the capital budget summary for healthy and safe communities. Our gross expenditure on capital is $27 million. That includes block funding of $5.6 million, development charge revenue of $392,000, and funded from the reserve $21 million. I would just like to highlight that the recreation capital budget and the long-term care capital budget for large facility maintenance projects will be presented on Friday during the Public Works Committee budget presentation. So the Housing Secretariat, Healthy and Safe Communities has an administration capital budget of about $250,000. This is to fund continuous improvement projects within the city, and $200,000 of that capital budget will be going to fund human services integration with the Housing Secretariat. Hamilton Fire Department has a gross capital budget of $14.4 million. This is for annual vehicle replacements of $8.5 million, annual equipment replacement of $4.5 million, renovations to facilities of $600,000, and mechanical mobile repair unit of $600,000 as well. Hamilton Paramedic Services has a gross capital budget of $8.5 million, annual vehicle replacements of $5 million, equipment replacements of $2.3 million, operational and clinical innovation of $800,000, and the 2024 ambulance enhancement is $400,000. The Housing Services gross capital budget is $3.7 million for 2024. This is to provide poverty reduction investments of $2 million, poverty reduction investments, Indigenous poverty reduction of $1.2 million, social housing repairs of $500,000, and long-term care within one of their capital budgets is $100,000 to enhance surveillance in and around the facility. There are no impact impact operating to capital for 2024. The new ambulance and all the staffing resources are being paid out of the reserve. You'll notice for 2025, where the impact of the investment in ambulance is on the tax levy of $826,640. That is because the municipal portion, let me back up. The provincial is 50-50 funded with the municipality, but we will not receive the provincial half of the ambulance. Yeah, and I'll have to start over again. So the paramedic enhancement is all funded through the reserve. The province doesn't provide funding to the municipality until the year after of 50%. The 50% will be allocated to the city's budget, so our net levy impact for 2025 is $826,000. And we have achieved $500,000 in mitigation. We are deferring the repair of expenditures to align with the cash flow requirements within the city services division. So this is a proposed budget summary of what we have discussed today. So our maintenance budget for 2023 is just slightly less than $300 million. Our proposed gross budget for 2024 is $851 million. Our combined proposed budget for the department, including council referred items and all business cases, is $332 million. We have mitigated approximately $30 million, and we have our capital investments of $27.1 million. So the proposed department increase percentage-wise is 11.1% for 2024. And I will be glad to take any questions that you have on the presentation.
Thank you, Acting General Manager Hrstick. So just before we go to questions, it's 12:15. We can either break now or we can continue through with questions. If there's not a lot of questions, I'd rather just continue and then finish the meeting. But that's up to committee. So continue? Yes? Okay. So I'll go to the speakers list. I'm not seeing any speakers. So we'll go to Councillor Clark, followed by Councillor Cassar.
I only have one question, and it's probably between this report and the last report. The list of people who are waiting for geared to income housing. I understood that there had been some work done on that list, and there was a breakdown in terms of folks who were trying to transfer them to another unit. They're already getting geared to income housing, and the other was a real list of people that were waiting for housing now. Do we have the most current numbers on that inventory?
Through the chair, maybe I'll ask Director Barrett if she can assist with this question.
Through the chair, yes. So I also have Manager Brian Krebs available if we need to go into detail on this one. But for this specific question, Councillor, I think the answer to your question is that we have approximately 1,000 individuals that are in that situation.
That are in the situation of currently renting a GIC unit in Hamilton and want to move to a unit that has more bedrooms or less bedrooms, that type of thing. Is that correct?
Through the chair. So I guess I would step back and say everybody that's on that list of the, approximately 6,000 individuals are all in need of some type of housing different than what they have now in order to meet their housing needs. We have individuals, though, who are overhoused, for example. They might be underhoused. For safety reasons, they need to move somewhere else. And of those individuals, that would be the list that we would call the special priority list. There's approximately 1,000 of those.
And in the remaining list, What's the current numbers?
Through the chair, so the remaining list would make up the difference, that approximately 5,000, the difference between that 1,000 individuals and the whole. What I will say to you, though, is that we won't have updated numbers for current to date until we get them at end of year. So when I'm speaking to you, I'm speaking from the end of 2022 perspective, but we don't see a lot of fluctuation in that list.
So we have a total of 6,000 waiting for GIC units. Did I hear that right?
Through the chair, yes, the rent geared to income, the total number on the access to housing wait list is just over 6,000 individuals.
And that includes all the priority numbers also.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Sorry, Chris. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. On the speakers list, Councillor Kassar, followed by myself. Councillor Kassar.
Thank you, Chair Danko. And just truly a couple clarification questions, because I think I'm maybe misinterpreting something. So on slide 15, there was an overview of budget and headcount, and it said no FTE change. And then in subsequent slides, there were FTE changes. So I'm just looking for clarification. Yeah, so it says 0 there, and then there was FTE changes, so.
Through the chair, this is a proposed complement for 2024 of our maintenance budget. So we didn't add any complement to our maintenance budget. The FTE increases would be through the council referred item and business cases. But you are correct, there's anticipated additional FTEs for 2024.
Okay, great. So thank you. That clarifies it. I wasn't hearing it properly. And then on slide 20, there was mitigation and transfers from reserve. And then the first, back up one, yeah, right there.
Little timers here, I can't see what slide number I'm on.
Yeah, so just wanted clarification here because it says transfer from reserve 27 million, which looks like it encompasses all of council referred items. And then subsequently in the detail, there was net levy impact. So similar question, just trying to reconcile the overall statement with the individual statements.
Through the chair, not all council referred items will be coming out of the reserve. Some will hit the net levy impact. But that is, the 27 is from reserves. Council referred items 23.7, but there's about $58 million in council referred items.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying. That's all I had, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Next on the speakers list is Councillor Jackson, then followed by myself. Councillor Jackson, please.
Thanks, Budget Chair Danko and Acting GM Hurstek. Excellent job in presenting. I'm trying to remember if you were presenting at previous budgets in an Acting GM role. I don't think so. You've always been Director of Recreation. And so I think you did a splendid job. Much appreciated. A couple of clarification questions, Budget Chair Danko, to the Acting GM. So all the housing division numbers, financial numbers, staffing numbers you showed, can I presume that they were part and parcel of what Director Baird presented a couple of hours ago? Or are your numbers over and above the numbers she presented? Because a lot of numbers from housing in the two presentations have been tossed our way. Through you, Budget Chair Danko, please.
Through the chair, the presentation, the numbers that were presented with Michelle Baird are reflected within my budget. There's not a duplication. They are the same numbers for council referred items in housing.
Terrific to know. Thank you. And so your overall department request is 11.1%, to be clear, all encompassing. Through you, Budget Chair Danko.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Lastly, on the recreation side of things, Chris, as our community the last year and a half have come out of the pandemic, families back to enjoying all our recreational facilities and amenities, can you give me some understanding in a cursory way? Are our rec centers, outside of any that may be closed or to be closed for upgrades and renovations, but currently, are the staffing levels, the programs, the times available at the rec centers and arenas, are they pretty well back to pre-COVID levels, please? In order for me to understand, to support this budget and whatever additional dollars you may need in recreation, that's important for my community. Through you, Budget Chair Danko, please.
Through the chair, excellent question, Councillor. I would say that the recreation program levels are almost back to pre-pandemic. Committee will remember that we did have a lifeguard shortage. We've, over the last year and a half, been able to retain and recruit additional lifeguards. So we'll be able to say that our aquatic program is almost at 100%, as well as the remaining recreation programs. There's some variances, Councillor, but I would say we're almost at pre-pandemic levels.
If that's encouraging, raising my comfort level, Acting GM, if that could just be possibly solidified in the upcoming days and couple of weeks, that's an important message from my standpoint, the visibility of the accessibility and affordability of our programs that are, once again, if you will, as much as possible at pre-pandemic levels. Thank you so much, Budget Chair Danko. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. Next on our speakers list is Councillor Cretch, followed by myself, and then Councillor Clark second time. Councillor?
Thank you. I'm glad the slide's up. My questions are about this slide also. One is for you, I imagine, and one is for General Manager Mike Zegarac about the overall budget. When I look at these documents that were online, and maybe they've changed since they were first released, I don't know. But when they were first released, I downloaded them and I looked at them all. And I see the complement summary for healthy and safe communities is 1.05, not 0. So I show that in public health services, there is a 1.05 change in the FTEs, but I don't see that reflected in this chart. So I'm just trying to track that difference because I noticed that there are some differences between the information here and the information on the internet.
Councillor, we'll get that information for you.
Okay, I'd also like to ask, and maybe this isn't fair to ask you, so I'll ask General Manager Mike Zegarac this question. Really, what are we striving to do here? As far as I understand, with this complement, showing this complement change of 0, I ask because all the council referred items, which I'll be honest and straightforward, I don't really think that framing is helpful. All the council referred items are part of the 7.9% budget increase. They're all part of the budget. So when we're having a budget discussion about a department, we're not also showing the number, like in a chart like this, there's obviously a reason why we're having a chart like this. It's clear, it's helpful, it's transparent. Where's the corresponding chart to show the total summary of all of the FTE changes by department? I don't understand why we'd have two separate charts or not a second chart at all. Yeah. To total up what the actual budget, proposed budget is demonstrating.
Through the chair, maybe I can start and then General Manager Zegarac can add in. These are already approved. The council referred items and business cases currently are not approved, so we didn't add those as a separate. We could provide that for additional information if required, but these are the approved complement count. Right now, the council referred items and the business cases, the FTE increase in those is not approved as of yet.
And so if I understand what you're saying, is that approved in the previous budgets, you mean?
Correct.
Right, so, right. Fair enough, but still, my question remains.
Through the chair. With respect to the slide that's before committee is, as Acting GM Hurstick took committee through, is with respect to the 2023 restated, there were still changes relative to the 2023 council approved. And those would have been in-year investments or changes, and Acting GM Hurstick listed, verbally shared all of those changes. And so that, in part, is the purpose of this slide. So you'll see 2023 council approved, approximately 2,756, 2023 restated, approximately 2,815. And so there would have been some, again, council approved investments through 2023. So we wanted to capture those changes. With respect to the 2024 proposed, if I can take you back to Friday, you may recall Friday we broke down the maintenance budget and then we broke down capital impacts, business cases, and council referred. The 2024 proposed is really a maintenance budget, and just in the case of Healthy and Safe Communities, that in order to support the services that Healthy and Safe Communities is anticipating for 2024, the department is not requesting any additional staff. With respect to each department, the story will change slightly. So some departments looked at vacant positions and repurposing vacant positions. So the narrative will change slightly with respect to the 2024 proposed budget by department. And then finally, with respect to complement changes, those are included in the budget documents. It includes the council referred impacts in terms of complements, the business cases. So again, that information is included in the budget documents.
Thanks. I guess I'll just leave it with the point of, I think it'd be more helpful to have this information more holistically presented so it's clear. The message this sends, let's be honest, to me is, there are no changes happening for FTEs in the department. It doesn't matter to me at what level these are all approved. That's frankly a lot of inside baseball. I think it should just be, here's how many we're going to have by the end of the budget if we approve the 7.9%, right? So that's really clear to everybody, because the numbers, again, in the sheets that I have here just don't add up to these numbers also. So thanks for that. Helpful.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vice Chair Wilson, if you could take the chair, please. Just have one question on the request for paramedics. It's something that's come up a number of years in a row. So can I just understand the reason why additional 10 FTEs, and I think it's an additional ambulance, are required as part of this budget?
Through the chair, maybe I'll invite Chief Sanderson to provide comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and Mike Sanderson, Chief of the Hamilton Paramedic Service. The extra 10 paramedics and the extra vehicle are part of our master plan that were presented and approved by council, or referred by council last year in the process. As you recall, last year we ended up doing a major increase in terms of staffing to catch up, as well as to deal with growth in call volume, about 35 full-time equivalents and 7 12-hour shifts. This is a continuation of that process as we've identified the ongoing growth. It's about a 3% growth each year that we're dealing with right now. We know that our call volume increased. We can also tell you that our performance increased as a result of the implementation of last year's process as well, both in response time performance by ward, as well as in our staff ability to manage the activities that they're dealing with. So those are the reasons that we'd be asking for the additional vehicle, Councillor, is to continue doing what we are doing. We're not where we need to be yet in terms of response time performance. We don't want to slide backwards as a result of increasing call volumes, and that's the requirement to continue moving us forward.
Thank you. Just a follow-up on that. The issue of offloading being a bottleneck, have we made progress on that? Is it still an issue in the plan moving forward?
To the Chair, yes, we have made offload progress. No, I'm not totally happy with where we are right now, but we have made significant progress as opposed to what's happened in many other jurisdictions in Ontario where they're continuing to have significant challenges. I can tell you last year I reported about 40,000 hours of offload time at the hospitals with a record. We're down 16,000 hours from that this year. That's down a decrease of 40% in 2023. The more significant one for me is the impact that has, as well as with the call volume on Code Zero events, and we're all very concerned about when we end up having reduced and narrowed resources in the process. I can tell you that last year in 2023, we had a total of 32 Code Zero events. And looking at my numbers here, that's 339 less than we had the prior year. So major improvements on that. Part of those improvements are the result of making sure we have adequate staff and the investment that council's made on it. Other investment that's been made on it as well is the investment from the provincial government, where they actually doubled our funding for the dedicated offload nursing programs at the General Hospital, the Juravinski, and at St. Joseph's Hospital. And that's doubled the number of available offload nurse staff to receive those patients incoming. So we've had excellent response. The Juravinski has really led the way in the process, a lot of lean processes, a lot of work with our staff, but we're continuing to see major reductions in the offload nurse process, or the offloading of patient process, and the return on investment for that.
Excellent. Good to hear some of the good work by our paramedic services. Thank you, Vice Chair. Those were all my questions. So with that, I'll go to Councillor Clark for a second time.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit confused still with regards to the slide on page 15. So I'm used to seeing FTEs as in, here's the new number of FTEs that we need. This chart here, is it displaying all the FTEs that are in those departments?
Through the chair, that is correct. As a full-time equivalent, it is not a head count. So part-time would not, I'll use recreation. It would be having 449 FTEs, but the head count is actually just over 1,300.
Okay, and then where it says proposed budget versus 23 restated, is this chart saying that staff did not recommend any increase in FTEs?
Through the chair, through the maintenance budget, the staff business cases were submitted. Those will be the additional FTEs, but they are not approved as of yet.
So what increase in FTEs is being proposed in total for this department? Staff recommended and council referred. Doesn't matter to me what the title is. How many more FTEs?
Through council referred items, 28 FTEs are being recommended, and through business cases, 24 additional FTEs.
That's more helpful. Thank you very much. One last question that I had. When I'm looking at the budget for our parks, it looks to me like we can only afford one replacement of a playground per year. Can I get confirmation on that?
Through the chair, that will be discussed at the Public Works operating budget presentation on Friday. Parks is within their department, but if I do recall correctly, their capital budget funding only allows for one replacement playground per year.
Yeah, that's what I thought I read. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm not seeing any further speakers. So with that, we can receive the presentation. Thank you, Acting General Manager Hurstick. I need a mover and a seconder to receive the presentation. Moved by Mayor Horvath, seconded by Councillor Nan. All in favor or opposed? And that carries unanimously. There are no motions today. Are there any notices of motion this afternoon? I'm not seeing any. So in that case, we will move to adjournment. Need a mover and a seconder to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Pauls, seconded by Councillor Beattie. All in favor or opposed? What are you looking at, gentlemen? Clerk. And that carries. We are adjourned. Thank you.